Give me just a second. Okay. Okay, we're ready.
Okay. And being 1 o'clock, I will call this special meeting of the Port of Hood River to order. This is fall planning for the commissioners that have not done this before. It's a little bit different. This is more of an opportunity for us to talk, ask questions, get some kind of idea where we want to go in the next year as staff begins to work on the budget for next year. It'll be less like a regular meeting. We won't be having motions. We won't be, perhaps asking staff to do specific tasks. This is just kind of idea where we want to be on, where we want to go on certain topics that are laid out in front of you. So really each commissioner is going to be able to take this wherever they want. We're going to be able to discuss kind of directionally where we want to go on certain things. So staff will have an idea as they're preparing for next year, what direction we're looking to go in. So what I would like to do, we have a bunch of different topics that we're going to talk about today. We're going to want everyone's thoughts. Some topics we'll talk longer than others. Some topics you may have more to say on one than another. That's just fine. So I'd like to do those. We're going to try as best we can to stay within the time constraints for each topic so we have a chance to talk about each item. I'll ask Michael or someone on staff if they would be willing to kind of remind us when we get to these certain time limits on each thing. Then we can choose to go longer or choose to talk about something else a little less. But if Michael or somebody on staff can take care of that, that would be great. So once Michael gets done with a couple of comments, we'll just get started. Don't feel bad if you need to get up. This is 4 hours. We'll probably just keep going right through it. I am going to try to finish up about 5 to 10 minutes before 5 o'clock. That way we can take a break before the regular session if we need to. It'll be a very brief regular session, so might not need to, but if you need to hop up, just go at any time. So Michael, you have a few comments?
Yeah, well, you covered most everything. Genevieve, would you be available to say do a 5-minute warning before the end of the allotted time? And
Yeah, I can be a timer and give you a 5-minute warning. And also, Commissioner Shepard, I wanted you to know that the regular session meeting has been noted that it will happen immediately upon adjournment of fall planning. So it doesn't have to be 5 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. So if we get done at 10 minutes to 5, that's when it's going to be, or thereabout.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I could, just a couple of points. Like I said, Ben covered them really well. This fall planning and spring planning is more about the commission talking and a whole lot less about staff. So it's valuable and important for staff to hear a discussion of the commission. We get the sense of where you want to go. We get ideas, your ideas of different matters, but it's incredibly valuable to just have the commission have the time to talk about these issues. Staff spent a lot of time preparing these issue papers, but when we get to an issue paper or a summary, our staff overview is going to be a minute or 2 minutes most. It's mostly you have it in your packet. We're going to highlight a couple of things, but then it's really up to the commission to go where you want to go in terms of each discussion. And I would just simply add that this meeting is happening later than most fall planning sessions. And because of that, and because of Fred's departure, this is more of the first step in our annual fiscal year budget preparation process. So we will be taking your either direction or your ideas, your discussion, and that'll help inform what we bring back to you as the draft staff budget to kick off next year. And we do have a second fall planning meeting scheduled if necessary next Tuesday. It all depends on whether the commission gets through these items or wants to continue discussion on another topic. That's all I had, Ben.
Okay, then I think probably the best thing to do is to just get started. We're going to start with kind of a financial policy and overview. In most of our topics today. Staff will just give a brief introduction, a few minutes. This one's going to obviously take a little bit longer than that. And then we'll be able to chat with Fred and ask questions. So Fred, go right ahead.
Okay. So I put in our financial policies, and if you had a chance to read it, I hope you have. We really have the three areas: reserves, debt coverage, and our return of investment. So the reason why you want to have them is if you ever are going to issue debt, you will need a set of financial policies. The market will want to see what you've done. And this is, we pulled this together, I want to say back in 2012 or 13 with the board then. And basically boards do wrestle with, the amount of reserves that you should have. And we've finalized it at 10% of net depreciable assets, since land does not depreciate. So that is where it's settled. It's okay. It's an adequate policy as long as we adhere to it, and that's what the market wants to see. The second is debt coverage. The reason why it's so high, and it's not really high. It's actually, when you go to the market, you issue $1 million, they'll want to see coverage of about 1.3, 1.35, meaning they'll want to see that your cash flow comes out to be $1,035,000 every single, or whatever the debt service is, 1.35 of the debt service. So that's the legal coverage. That means if you don't meet it, you're in default. So that's why we've always had a 2.0 debt coverage, so the market can see that. Market, it's adequate as far as the market is concerned. It actually gives us a pretty good rate when we go to the market. So they want to see the policy, and they want to see whether we adhere to it. And the third one is, cash on cash return with regard to our investments, and that is there. So I just want to brief, with regard to fiscal policies. They've been there for a while. They're good policies. The market views them as at least satisfactory. And I think we've adhered to them, which has more credence when you go to the market. So if anyone has any questions just on the policies, I'll hold, and then I'll go on to the 10-year financial forecast.
I had
Okay.
one question. So when you say it's satisfactory, in comparison with other ports and other public agencies, is that 10% kind of on the mid side? Are we on the low side, or should we be thinking maybe a little bit more conservatively since we're going to have some big changes coming up? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So what the market looks at is whether you're capital intensive. We are. Mostly they look at the kind of organization you are. If you're a utility, they want to see deep reserves because you have deep assets. So with regard to us, they would look at us like we're probably between, we're adequate. We're not low, but we're adequate. Okay, Genevieve, I'm going to go with the 10-year financial forecast. And if you can bring up the spreadsheet, this is where it sort of all boils down to just a little bit higher. There you go. So
Want me to give you control, Fred?
Sure, sure.
Okay, let me do that. If I can figure out how to do that. Why won't it let me? All right, I'll try to figure that out. But in the meantime,
okay. So the model has sort of a worksheet for each asset. So a bridge is an asset, marine is an asset, airport, and then our recreation, meaning marina park, event site, so forth. And basically, we show the amount of revenues for each of those assets, and we show the expenses for each of those assets. And they all roll together. They're linked back to the summary page. And what happens every single year is I go ahead and I update the model, usually before fall planning, for the actuals that occurred for the prior year, meaning in this case, 2021. And then we get ready for the budget for the following year, which will be 22-23. And because we already have the budget updated for 2022. So what you have in the model is sort of an updated budget column in that year 2022 that we're in. The 2021 and prior are actuals. And as we move forward, we base upon a lot of factors going into subsequent years from 2023 on. And we normally do 10 years. So that would be from 2020 to 2030. And then we'll add a year every single budget cycle. And each of these sheets, like I was saying, they roll into the operating revenues. So what you see is a conglomerate of all the revenues in that line item called operating revenues. And then same thing is done with regard to expenses and personnel. And assumptions in there are, basically we have a sort of a step system to our compensation. And we also have CPI. We try to assume about a 2 to 2.5% CPI every year, although it may fluctuate. And I adjust that based on actuals when we actually have that information. And then what that does is sort of drive down our net operating income before debt service and capital outlay. So as you can see, and you will see below, we're very capital intensive. What swings this forecast really isn't so much the expenses. It really doesn't. What swings it is revenues and also capital. That will swing the bottom line. And so let me keep going down. We derive a cash, a little bit further up, Genevieve. There you go. So on that cash and cash return, basically all those formulas roll in, and so what you have is your net operating income after debt service and capital outlays. You get a cash return on that. We have sort of a estimated FTE based on what we have at the time. This gets updated, maybe once every other year when I can reach out to the different tenants. Actually, the property manager helps me here figuring out all of our employees or all the employees of our tenants. And that's where those numbers come from. And then you say wages of jobs in 4 buildings. That's just a number that gets pulled as well. But here's where I'm going with my conversation. At the end of the day, you have reserves, and that's your bottom number there. And those are our liquid assets. They're either with the LGIP, they're in the bank, or they're in investment, like based on our investment policy. So if I take 2021, for instance, we ended the year with $12.5 million. That's what we have. If we wanted to spend it, we have that much. But then I break it apart and I say, because a prior board always wanted to see our land sales. They believed that those sales, in this case, they were industrial land sales. They wanted to keep track of that. They wanted to show what amount is in the reserves that is really related to the land sales, because they wanted a one-time benefit land sale being used for one-time purchase, in this case, maybe industrial property. So they wanted to isolate that. And so of that 12.5, we have about 3.1 million in land sales. And then the rest of it is what I call unassigned. And what I do then, as part of the policy, right? We say, what's my net depreciable assets and what's 10% of my net depreciable assets? It's about $6 million, almost 6.1. So our net depreciable assets is over and above what we call our unassigned reserves. In this case, $3.3 million. And so what we do with this forecast is we're forecasting out to make sure that we never go below, we have a negative excess of depreciable assets. So we maintain our, we're maintaining our policy, or meeting or complying with our policy with regard to reserves. So this goes on, and that's what this model with regard to that one policy does for us. So why you can see this fluctuation. In 2021, we show 3.3. Based on our budget, we're going to show about 2.2, right? In 2022, and it goes down in 2023. All this, as you can start to see, it starts to bump. And so if you go down below, in 2022, we have about $69 million of depreciable assets. And then it goes up to $83 million. Well, that tells you immediately what's happening is we're putting into assets quite a bit. And so that's what drives down some of that excess. And you'll see that on the capital project sheet. And that is probably your next sheet behind here. If you look, it will depict all the different type of capital outlay that we have planned over the next horizon into 2030. And most of it is, small, minor, and you can see the big dollars. So we have, if you go to the next page, there you go. In 2023, we show about 1.7, almost $1.8 million in East Anchor Way. That's a little bit further up. Yeah, there you go. And then you see a little bit with regard to 250, and you see a little bit of that. So, but where the big dollars are, if you go down a little bit further, Genevieve, to bridge and keep going, and airport. So stop right there. Okay. So previously, our assets, we leverage as much of our assets with grants or debt, hopefully grants. And you will see that in another worksheet I've developed that really explains more of it. But as you can see here, and this, what's driving all this capital is the bridge replacement. So here we received the $5 million of Oregon, Washington, and the build grant. And that's on a separate sheet. But here's the capital component. And then this is where it's driving a lot of that capital spending. Luckily here, we have almost a one-to-one, almost, relationship on some of our grants relating to this bridge replacement, although the build grant has a match. If you go further down just a little bit, you'll start to see where we're going to replace the wire ropes. In 2023, we have about $1.6 million there. And then we have loaded in the forecast only. And I just got to remind everyone, these are just forecasts. It's not the budget, and it's definitely not a contract to do work, but it tells a story nonetheless, and that's what we're trying to do. And so the posting, the load analysis and rehab, we have about $1 million sitting out there. That's an earmark. Could, maybe, I don't know what will happen, but at least we put that in the forecast. And if you ask, where do I drive these numbers? I mean, I just load them in, and no, actually, like with regard to the bridge replacement, I pull that information from Kevin's worksheets that he has with regard to the bridge replacement effort and those grants. And with regard to the repair of the existing bridge, I pull that from the engineer's report that Michael will show you. So a lot of our capital is spent in these two areas, bridge mostly, airport next, and then we have some other cost with regard to the waterfront and some of our industrial properties. So if you drop this down a little bit, Genevieve, keep going down. Okay, and so here is where you'll start to see a lot of that capital in 2023, 10.6 million, 7.5, 6.5, 2025. So this is where a lot of our capital is driven. And so when you go back to that summary sheet, that is where you're starting to see that change at that bottom line. And it's really over in this area. So I can, if you go keep dropping down, you get into the debt schedule, or you'll get into grants. And this basically shows all the different kind of grants we will have. You'll see that we're hoping for East Anchor Way grant of some sort there. We putting it in the forecast doesn't mean we actually will get that or get that amount nonetheless, but we put it in because it is something that we're looking toward doing unless we are told otherwise. If you keep dropping it down, Genevieve, they get into the airport and you get into the bridge. So that's where in this worksheet we do both. We show financing with regard to grants. If there's any red, like you'll see in the middle of that spreadsheet, the asset called bridge. And if you look over to the right, you start to see all these red numbers. So red means debt. So basically, I'm using debt to fund that capital improvement. If it's blue, it's a grant. And so if it's a combination like a purple or green, it's sort of grant and a debt, if that's the case. So, so I want to go back to the top, Genevieve, go back to that summary sheet. And yeah, at the bottom there. So this really tells the story of the bottom, and our forecast really monitors the reserves and whether we continue to stay in compliance. So I'll open it up for any forecast questions you may want to have.
I've got one, Fred. Hey, if you go back to the last sheet you just showed on the grants and the debt. Okay, Fred, how much long-term debt are we committed to right now using the current bridge revenue tolls as collateral?
As collateral, we only have 3 pieces of debt. 2 of them are small. I'm gonna say about $500,000 for the marina that's outstanding, or maybe $450 now. And then we also have the Jensen building that was refinanced. So when I say the bridge revenue, I want to make the distinction. That means it's just a backstop to get the debt. In the case of, let's say, the marina and Jensen, their revenues pay for the debt today. So if something were to happen, like, I don't know, the marina catches fire, then that would be a problem. Same with Jensen. We have to use insurance proceeds or whatever. But what I'm saying is those assets are paying for their debt service today and still having a positive cash flow. So when I say backstop, we use it to get a lower rate and to get more access to different places in the market when we go get that.
Okay, so the sound was a little fuzzy coming through. So could you just summarize for me how much long-term debt do we have using the bridge as collateral today that we're committed to?
That we're committed to?
Yep.
Good question. I'm gonna get it to you. Hold on. I don't want to guess. I've had enough time to guess, so. I'll get you a straight answer. $2.2 million. $2,266,000.
Okay, 2.2. And right now, when would that be paid off?
Over
If
a
we
different
assume-
period.
If we assume that we're not going to add any more debt based on the bridge, tied to the bridge, when would we have that paid off?
At different points of time, but the last piece of it would be in 2030.
Okay. Okay,
Oh, good. Fred, don't we show a debt at Lower Hannells Mill starting in
No, we
2022?
actually paid that off.
But on the spreadsheet, it shows it going out to 2030. 97,000. And also the Jensen building, that term is how long? Is that a 20-year note?
That got refinanced out to 2030.
Is that so? We
Yeah,
paid-
I don't know where your 97,000, we paid, yeah.
On Hannells,
Is that Hannell?
yeah, construction loan.
Unless that's in the forecast and we're gonna build something.
Right. And you forecasted it for how long out, Fred?
Oh, on Hannell, it'd only be 15 years. Yeah,
15 years.
from whatever the date was, yeah.
And then Jensen will be paid in full in 2030, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just, and it just starts to drop, everything drops down, and then, yeah. So if we wanted to pay any of that off earlier, we could if we wanted to. But they're great rates, I don't know if I'd do it yet.
so another question for you, Fred. You know, based on this particular plan that you've got, how much more debt would you add on and tied to the bridge?
I'm gonna get to that question. That will be in the next, after we get through the forecast, I'm gonna talk about a couple of other things. And in that conversation, I'm gonna talk about that exact question.
Okay, so then could we go back to your very first page? I want to make sure I understand your numbers.
Okay,
If you go to the very top. Okay, and let's pick 2022 as an example. So on your operating revenue line, you've got values out there and I'm sure it's made up of bridge toll revenue we get from leases, from rents and all the rest of the neat stuff. When you look out in the future, each of those years go up a little bit. So you've assumed that rent's going to go up. Do you have a bridge toll increase assumption in here?
yes, so the bridge toll, we do about every 5 years based on a cumulative CPI. So every 5 years we go up. Let's just use a real quick. If my CPI is up 1% a year, in year 5, I go up 5%. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go back over so I can see the name of the line. So you got operating revenues up there, total direct operating expenses. What? Oh, expenses, yeah. So again, on that one, starting at 2022, you've got 3,300,000, then it goes up. And then there's
Correct.
sometimes it goes down.
Correct. And that has more to do with the build grant. So for a long time with which the House Bill 2017, that was a EIS study, right? So that wasn't capital, that was expense. So that sort of winds down. But then we started bumping up with all the new Oregon, Washington, and the build grant, but that's all capital. So it's less with regard to expenses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just to make sure, on your total operating revenue, that's a mixture of, leases and tolls and so on, but also build grants?
That's yeah, correct, your grants as well, your operating grants. So we'll bump it up, correct. So it links that as well on the summary sheet.
So I'm surprised I don't see your total operating revenues floating around as the grants float around. As you burn off a grant and you haven't replaced it, like you see in this total operating expenses out in 23, 24, when it goes down, why don't you see that in operating revenue?
Well, I'm saying my operating grants. I'm not talking about my capital grants. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I don't know. I'm
Yeah, no, this
I'm
is
trying to understand what's in your line.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's just your operating. It's not your capital grants. That is not reflected there.
Okay. And then you have down on the third line, total allocated personnel.
Right.
So is that port personnel?
Correct. So what I want to say is that that line called direct operating expenses, that's more your materials and services. And then your personnel costs are sitting in the allocated personnel.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. So do you have to add the two together, right?
Yeah, those are expenses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now on your total allocated personnel, you've assumed going out a certain staffing level and wages. What did you assume for escalation on your wages?
So it does, that's why it sort of tweaks during certain, years. So a compensation, policy is like most governments, it's a step program, 5% between each step. But once you hit the max, then you hit the max. Also, there's a cost of living increase in there. So you'll start to see that as well. So when people hit the max, there's no more a large increase.
Okay, so you've got a worksheet down below here by position?
No, I feed that in on a separate worksheet.
Yeah, I understand, but you got a worksheet by staff person. So
Yeah,
you know when they hit the max.
Yeah, yes, correct. I do that, and you probably saw a little bit of it in the budget process.
Okay. Okay, so then you come down with total operating income before debt. So if you take your total operating revenue, line 1, and subtract line 2 and 3 is line 4.
There you go.
Okay, and then if you take line 4 and subtract out what you pay off in your debt service, that gets you line 6, net operating income after debt service.
Yeah, basically you got to add your capital grants, your debt that you get as far as a lump sum against your capital, and that nets down here along with line 4, correct?
Okay. Okay, so what you're saying in 2022, we're going to have roughly $2.4 million we're going to pay out in debt service.
Where do you see that?
If you go 3.8 million net operating income before debt service, and then the second line down, net operating income after debt service.
So what that tells me is not debt service, it's debt service and capital outlay. So.
Oh, and capital outlay. Okay,
yeah.
Got it. Okay, so between debt service and capital outlay, we're going to spend $2.4 million.
I need to, so in here, that line item that you're talking about, that net operating income after debt service and net capital outlays, why I say net capital outlays is that's the net effect of your grants against your capital. So if it's a 1-to-1, it's just a 1-to-1 ratio of 0. and then you just take out your debt. Does that make sense?
No, I don't get that. I'm sorry.
So in the number for everyone's on the column 2022, we have a number of 1,000,484.
Yep.
In that number, basically it's taking your 3,883 above.
Yep.
And it's subtracting your capital. And it's subtracting your debt service, but it's adding your grants, your capital grants.
Okay, so.
To get to the 1,484.
So if you're grant funded in that year
Correct, at 100%.
at 100%, you're still in, that number is still in the operating expense or allocated personnel, is it not right?
What? No. So you're
I mean, the expense side of it.
on the capital?
No, you're saying net operating income after debt service and net capital outlay excluding grant funded. When you say excluding grant funded, is that on the revenue side or is that on the cost side?
That's on both. So I have a capital piece. So in this number, the 1,484,000, if I had $1 million capital outlay over on that one sheet, let's say the load analysis, and let's say that load analysis actually had $1 million, right, of grant, then this impact on the 1,000,484 would be zero. So that difference going between 2022 and down to 3,883,000 down to 1,000,484, I subtract out all the debt service and I subtract out all the capital outlay, all of it, and then I add in the grants to get to that number.
When you say you subtract all of the capital outlay.
Correct.
For the given year or for?
Yes.
The entire project? Yeah, it's a given
Correct.
year.
For the given year, correct.
So everything is on a fiscal year basis.
Correct.
So revenues and expenses are all on the same schedule.
Correct.
Okay. But I'm maybe it's just me. If the rest of you understand it, I'm cool, but I still don't get how you're excluding grant funded and how that plays in the 1.4 million. I get the 9.8 million. I get the next two lines. And I understand the debt service and I understand capital outlay.
So what we're trying to do is get down to what's my remaining cash, right? So if I start with my revenues, take out my materials and services, take out my personal services, then I take out my debt, I take out my capital, but I have to add in that one piece, my capital grants, because that's cash coming in.
Got it. Okay. I understand now.
Okay.
I got it.
Okay.
Okay.
So any other questions on the capital?
Go back to that one sheet for just a second. I'm almost done. The cover sheet there. Okay, so if you go down, year-end reserves. Okay, that's a cumulative through the year end, is it not?
That is correct. That's what I would report on the balance sheet.
Okay. Okay. So right now, at the end of 22, if we hit this budget, we'll have 13 million in reserve.
Correct.
If you go to the hard right, okay, out in 2028, we would have 31, almost 32 million in reserve.
Correct. Remember, that's every 5 years I'm doing a CPI toll increase as well. And our leases, we got all the assumptions going, right? So the assumption is 100% vacancy with, I mean, not vacancy, 100% non-vacancy with regard to our tenants. Our tenants are there paying, things like that. So it's, yes, you would have that.
So if we just do a real quick calculation, 2028, 2906 divided by 2022, 2639, 2639. Wow. So on the third line, which is dealing with staff, it looks like to me, if you look at that number there, 2906, and you divide it by the 2022 number, which is 2639, that's only a 10% increase. And that's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, you're only going to have a 10% increase. And if you assume that your staff is constant, you don't have anything in there for escalation on wages.
Well, here's the thing. You mentioned the one key. If my staff is constant, I can have a constant FTE count, but it's not going to have my compensation is going to vary. So what happens over time is people leave at probably the very high end of the compensation ceiling, and we bring someone in, and they're usually not at the high end. They're usually towards the bottom end of compensation.
So you must have a pretty high turnover rate that you're assuming.
No, not necessarily, but we don't have. I'm not looking at high inflation in the model. That might change based upon the latest information, but I haven't changed it. I'm a little leery of that. I show low inflation.
I think, okay.
You know,
Just an observation.
that might be the fly in the ointment that might come true. I'll probably know that. I'll know that for sure in February. Well, maybe I won't know that, but someone's going to know that early February.
I think you got some exposure there.
Possibly, yeah.
I'll bet you a dinner you got exposure there.
I'll have it just a beer.
But you're going to have to be around 2030 to collect it.
Well, I'll be alive, hopefully.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you.
Fred, I think we skipped over the debt service schedule right now.
Yeah, I mean,
We've got
I
about
don't- yeah,
7 minutes
I
left for
just-
this topic.
Oh, yeah. What I want to do is get to these other questions in the agenda.
Yeah.
And I want to go to that next, so get out of the financial model and come over to the what I call the use of bridge revenue.
Okay.
What I did here was I wanted to stratify what's happened with our bridge tolls, because this has come up, and it probably come up in the bi-state working group. So I just tell them, this is how prior boards basically, you know, they put the policy forward that the first 50 cents on our toll is discretionary. The next amount, there's an amount that was that could be used towards the bridge, but how they defined it was it would be towards bridge expenses, maintenance, capital, debt service. And then the last increase, it had to do with the 2018 increase. That was bridge repair and replacement. So if you drop down a little bit, Genevieve, here we go. I know these numbers are a little small, but bear with me. So on this page, I show the different funds. the revenue fund, and the bridge repair and replacement fund. This sheet answers a lot of questions. It does. So what I started with was just on the top half is just the bridge. We're just dealing with the bridge. Bridge, we have bridge revenues. They come into the revenue fund. And every year I move money over to the bridge repair and replacement fund, dealing with, and I have to do this exercise, which I did, that stratifies these revenues. The first 50 cents, it's very important because this was a policy. That first 50 cents was discretionary. And so if you look across from 2018 to 2021, you'll see that first line. The second line was that second increase that occurred from 50 cents up to 80 cents for breeze buy. And then we also went to $1 for cash toll. And then the third line was the 2018 increase. So breeze buy went from 80 cents to $1, so that's 20 cents. And then the cash toll went from $1 to $2. So that gets moved over here to the bridge repair and replacement fund. Boom, goes over. I do this exercise every year. Is it accurate? It's as accurate as we can get it within our systems, which is, it's good enough. I think it's auditable. Our other column is just other sources, like we get some revenue off the bridge with regard to our cabling. There's some money there. There's some just odds and ends with regard to that. Over here on the bridge repair and replacement fund, that other is really the grants, House Bill 2017. So that's where you'll see that number. And that's why it's so small in 2018. That's when we started up. The rest of it's pretty self-explanatory. If you move down operating expenses, personnel, utilities, that's all normal expenses, but those are the bridge expenses. So we're just talking expenses. So I come down, that gives me my total operating cost without depreciation. And then I look on the revenue fund, it shows me my capital improvements for the bridge and any debt service for the bridge. When we always kept the debt service, not in the revenue fund, which is the first four columns, it's over here in the bridge repair and replacement fund. It's where we always kept our debt service because the debt relates to capital improvements on the bridge. And so what you have there are the capital improvements with regard to the existing bridge. There's no capital outlay relating to the replacement of the bridge. And so if you take out, if you add up your revenue and take out all your costs, the bottom line is your net revenues after capital and debt service. So that is what you see here, over here on the right-hand side for the bridge repair and replacement. Now,
Fred, you might want to just point out the end of our debt service from the 2006 debt.
Yeah.
Occurred in.
Yeah, so we refinanced in 2013, but that debt ended in that final year of 485. So that was in 2019. Fiscal year ended 2019. I want to move back over to the first four columns, the revenue fund column.
Hey, Fred, we're about out of time here. I'm gonna let you keep going, but if commissioners have some questions.
I'm gonna hurry up, but I want to make this one key point.
We might have some questions, but it'll just end up shortening up something else that we're gonna do.
So what we do is we have our net revenues after capital and debt service, then we add it in because it's a revenue fund, right? We add in non-bridge revenues because the revenue fund has everything else, and non-bridge expenses. And here I take out my lobbying costs as well, just to derive what my net operating revenues. This bottom number called net operating revenues, that's really our ongoing negative, right? So where are we? If we didn't have any capital, which we do, by the way, but if we didn't have it, and I just looked at revenues versus my expenses, I'm about $500,000 short. In the case of 2021, we're about $448,000 short. So that question of where do we got to go? Well, we know we need to go at least that much just to cover my expenses. As far as in the next discussion that Michael will talk about is financial sustainability, talks a little bit about this. So, and then in the revenue fund, we have our grants, all of our grants, and majority of our grants are not with the bridge that are in the revenue fund, it's FAA. So that line, that $3.1 million in 2021, that's mostly FAA grant, Connect 6, FAA. And then capital outlay for the revenue fund. And those capital outlay I put in purple, so you can sort of see all the purple capital outlay down below. What were they? You know, because it's a large number. And we're a large, that's our capital. I mean, look at our operating expenses, 1.9 million. Our capital outlay is 4.3, twice. So we're capital intensive. So anyway, so then we have debt service, and that's the Marina and Jensen. It gives me down to a, you know, what is my subsidy for everything? What is that subsidy for the bridge? You know, $1.9 million. This is the point I'm trying to make real quickly. That line, subsidy from bridge revenues, 1.9 million in 2021, 763,000 in 2020. Now go up to, drop this down, or go up, Genevieve. There is that discretionary piece the board always wanted to see that we never went over. Meaning we had 2.2 million from the bridge. We will not subsidize more than that out of our discretionary pot. That's important. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I've got a question for you, Fred.
Yeah.
So really simply back up to 40,000 feet here. Put that back up if you would, that one sheet. Okay, in 2021, total revenue off the bridge would be 3.9 million plus 3.1 million.
1.7 million.
Okay, 1.7. So that's 495, roughly 5.6.
Yep.
5.6 million in 2021.
Yep.
How much money has the port spent on the new bridge?
That would be the next, well, that sort of would be that line called other in the bridge repair and replacement fund.
No. You spent $1.3 million this year on the new bridge?
Yeah, it's called the House Bill 2017.
Do you have the breakout of where that went?
Yeah, and yes, I do, but I didn't present it here.
If I would, I would like to see where that money went.
It's
Now,
most
because I think here's where I'm, time out, Fred. Here's where I'm going with this. We're going to be in a sales job with the communities, with the states and so on. How are we taking care of ourselves trying to build a new bridge? So what equity are we bringing to the party? And if we can show that, hey, last year we spent $1.3 million, we've got some reserves, we got this kitty that we're putting together, that's going to help our story. I just don't know what that story is right now. And I'd like to know, of the 1.3 million that we spent in 21, where did it go?
Well,
NEPA.
all it is.
Primarily went to NEPA.
Thank you, Kevin.
I want to see it. I want to see it because I think it's more than NEPA, Kevin. I think we got lobbyists in there.
No.
We got your salary. We got some of Michael's salary in there. Do we not?
No.
My salary is part of that 269.
Correct.
But we've
Correct.
spent money on you and we should be taking credit for it because you're part of the new bridge.
Yeah, so when you look at that 269,000, drop down a little bit to that 269, right? In that 269,000, part of it is replacement for Michael's time, maybe a little bit of mine, a little bit of, but also in there is all of Kevin's time.
Fred, I get it, but you're not helping me with the real question that we asked is of the bridge repair and replacement fund, how much did we really spend on the new bridge? There's a perception out there that we put together this bridge repair and replacement fund, which is really the bridge repair fund. It's not a replacement fund.
I would, up until 2018, that probably is very true.
I'm just talking 18 to now.
I know. So if you're just looking at that, I mean, I can pull that together. It's presented within numbers here. Kevin's piece is the largest piece, almost a $5 million piece. But yeah, I mean, it's not too difficult.
I think it behooves us as the port to create the books that show that kind of a split to help us with our story that we're trying to create,
I mean, if you want to show it, it's not within fund accounting or how you do it from a governmental accounting standpoint. You would do a management report. Let me say, you do a management report that would show me all the costs for bridge replacement only. And we
so then change this thing from bridge repair and replacement fund to bridge repair.
Yeah, that's a fund difference. So that's something the board will have to, you can only do within a budget process and you have to legally do it.
Okay, I'm done with this.
If you'd like to take care of that at a board meeting sometime, ask for that kind of direction, that's fine. Probably need to move on right now because it's not a planning topic.
The last piece, I have a last piece here. The next piece is debt capacity regarding bridge toll increases. So drop that down. What I did real quickly, and this won't take long. You're gonna have to there you go. So what I did was I said, what are we looking at as far as if we were to just do what the budget contemplated, and the budget contemplated a CPI increase. In this case, it'd be about 5 cents for breeze buy and about 25 cents for cash. That was within the budget. And if you do that, you have you will have some people move more towards breeze buy, which we want. And there'll be more of the community that'll do that. Well, what's the impact? It's at the bottom. We forecast about 714,000. If you're thinking, or if the community is thinking, hey, we want to really get started on the bridge replacement, and we do a dollar toll increase. We go from breeze buy from $1 to $2 and cash toll from $2 to $3. What does that give me? Well, it gives you about $3.5 million. However, remember, debt coverage. So our debt coverage is, to get that, we only have about 1.7 and change, maybe 1.8, depending upon what the market gives me. But what it does is it gives you about $21 million, just to give you an idea of what that would do. It's not going to give you $50 million. It's going to give you about $21 million. So that is what this schedule, what I wanted to do was pull all that together from reserves to, where did that money go to, what are we looking at in the future if we increase tolls? Some bookends. What does that look like? So anyways, that's where I wanted to go. Sorry, Ben, I went over, but anyways, that's what I wanted to do.
No, it's just fine. We can make it up later. Anybody have any questions about that last one or want to talk about anything right there? Okay, good start. I can keep this in front of me for the rest of the conversation. I'm sure it's going to come up again, Fred.
Okay.
Michael, do you want to move into financial sustainability?
Absolutely. The sum of this is that this notion, this objective of reaching a financial fiscal sustainability standpoint in the future is something we have to anticipate. It's something the commission has anticipated for several years. It's embedded deeply in our updated strategic business plan. So what this memo tries to do is just lay out the challenges that we face, which are stated, also the opportunities that we have. And the primary opportunity is there's some time to implement change, to try to build additional revenue streams and reach the point of fiscal sustainability at or hopefully prior to the point at which the new bridge may be built. So the memo also summarizes the approaches that have been implemented. And on kind of rough cut numbers, that's about $460,000. The commission, a couple of those steps the commission has just implemented with the additional increases in marina and T-hanger lease payments. Also, the lease template that Greg will mention in his issue paper is in process of being implemented. It's implemented as the terms of different leases are and new leases are negotiated. And then the revenue enhancement steps being considered, the first two are certainly in play right now. That being the commercial hangar and the ground lease at lot 900. The one that, although it's been discussed and certainly something that's been in our minds as we look ahead, is not actively being considered by the commission, but certainly on the list. And that's the concept or the idea that a future bridge will require a tolling system, and the port is positioned well to provide that service to the future bridge authority. So if you take those that are, again, the big numbers in the tolling operation. So if you minimize that consideration, we've achieved or could achieve perhaps a $600,000 gross number about to fill that hole. And then the additional potential actions that the commission will need to discuss in the future will be part of our discussion for the next fiscal year budget preparation are listed there. It's a complex subject because, as you know, there will be likely need to be money spent and money borrowed in order to build additional revenue streams. There is a reasonably significant reserve that Fred discussed that comes from prior sales, and by commission direction, those should be utilized for additional land purchase or additional development costs that can build revenue in the future. So if you go back up a little bit, in some ways, these are potential actions. Like I said, we'll need to think about these and discuss them and reach a decision on some of them in the next fiscal year budget. As Fred said, we're a very capital intensive operation, so certainly reduction of those capital projects that are non-critical would have a material impact on our finances. I'm not going to go over all those, but you can see them there. As you get down to the last two, the serial levy is something that, although unlikely, needs to be on the list. The biggest challenge we face over time and will in the future is how do we take care of waterfront recreation properties? We're essentially a parks provider. And so there's limited opportunity to recoup or offset those costs with user fees and things, although we have done some. And then eventually there needs to be a discussion about what's the service level that the port can provide, and what's the operational construct that we need to provide those level of services. So these are discussion items that I thought would be appropriate. If you could scroll down a little bit, Genevieve. So we have to arrive at assumed date for opening of the replacement bridge. Currently, that's showing it, Kevin, check me, 2029 or so. That doesn't mean that that's the date for like break-even point in fiscal sustainability, but I think we have to make an assumption that'll flow through our 10-year business model, and it'll to some extent drive some of these decision-making for fiscal sustainability. I mentioned the mission and structure of the port when a placement bridge is operational. The definition of the revenue gap to be filled, we would utilize, or a couple of years ago, I would have utilized something on the order of 1.2 million, maybe 1.3. So if you look at those steps that are listed above that have been taken, then the revenue gap, and I'll look to Fred to check me, that's remaining is something on the order of $700,000, $800,000. The use of debt and reserves I mentioned, and all of this or some of this will fold into what staff prepares for a fiscal 23 budget. So that's an overview. Love to hear what the commission has to say about this topic. It's an important one.
Just some comments that I've got. If the commission backs off a little bit, and part of our job is to give the port strategic goals that we ought to be working towards in our budgeting process and our execution process, I think it's worth spending a few minutes, again, big picture, where do we want the port to be over the next several years? And then the direction is to the port, okay, figure out how we can get there. As one example of that, let's see. I'm trying to share something here. And you can't see that, right?
No, can't see anything.
Does it let you do that now?
I'm trying to get back to it. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
I've got it enabled so everybody can share their screen, so.
There it goes. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yeah, it's reversed. It's a little hard to read because it's white on black.
How do I change that? Anybody know?
I don't.
Okay, well, the key one that I wanted to talk about is item number 1, which is reduce reliance on bridge toll revenue to fund non-bridge related operating costs. Base year for comparison would be this year, 21-22. And these are just suggested amounts, but I think it gives the port something to work towards, and we have some measurement to see how we're doing against it. We all realize that we can't wait until the new bridge is up and running and the revenue stops to start making these adjustments and changes in our operating plan. So I came up with an idea. First off, the bridge estimate that just finished has a scheduled date for starting up the new bridge on October 1, 2028. That's what the schedule calls for. Now there's work after that to do some road work and then also to get rid of the old bridge. But 28 is the October 1, 2028 is the current date on that estimate. So with that in mind, I said by 2022, 2023, June of 2023, reduce the reliance by 20%. And then a year later, reduce it by another 20%. A year later, another 20%. A year later, another 20%. So by June 30th, 27, we're off the reliance of the current bridge. That gives us about 18 months or 15 months of what I call slop time that, you know, we're not there, but we don't really have to be there yet. And if we can hit these numbers, we're creating reserves that we can use for other things. So I'm not saying these are the right numbers and the right time frame, but I think it behooves the the port commissioners to come up with some direction, strategy of what we want the port to drive to. So I offer that up to you. And then I've got some others that we can talk about, you know, when we get to the various elements, but a top level strategy could be something like this.
And I think that's one that's been talked about in the past as well, as reducing reliance on bridge revenues. And that kind of is coupled into all the discussions we have on how we're generating revenue and how much, and how are we using our properties, our developments, our investments to generate revenue. I don't know that every single project and every single property is going to meet these exact same standard of revenue generation, but at aggregate, we need to be cash positive. We need to be generating revenue. An example, recreation is never going to make us a ton of money. It can make us more than it is now, but it's never going to make us enough. So, but it's something we have to provide, and we should. And so using those, I don't know what the benchmark is going to be, and we can talk about that, but yeah, reducing reliance on the bridge while still, you know, investing wisely and developing wisely is going to be important.
I just think if we plot that curve and we monitor ourselves against that curve, how are we doing against it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's going to be some years we'll beat it, some years maybe we won't, or maybe with a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work, we can beat the curve and start generating a real surplus for us. That's a good thing. But I would offer up, I think, commissioners, we've got to think strategically and offer that up to the port as strategic direction.
Michael, when's our new triple net lease template supposed to be fully implemented?
Greg checked me. I think that's 2024.
You are correct.
Is that just us getting through everybody that had an existing lease when we adopted that a couple years ago?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
I like your picture, Greg.
Michael, Commissioner Strike, you mentioned market breeze by other agencies. Due to the fact that Fred's retiring, who's going to fill that position?
Well, we're still in a search process, so I can't answer that part. Hopefully we'll get a good candidate. I would say that with Fred's experience and expertise walking out the door, I think that's probably a whole lot less likely we'll be able to market that.
Thank you.
Unless Fred comes back on a consultant basis to head up that new department.
Heard about a new series. He's flying into Jackson Hole.
Lake Cuomo.
Maybe we can talk with Hobie on some flights, maybe, yeah.
Any other commissioners thoughts on this topic?
I just have a quick question. Daryl, when do the boathouses lease end? I noticed that was on Commissioner Fox's.
They have a 5-year rolling lease. So we missed our window this fall to give them notice. So what we will need to do is next October, let them know that this is your notice that in 5 years, your lease will be up.
Okay.
And just so, is there a number, how many, say you did remove a boathouse, how many slips could you put in there?
Probably 2 slips per boathouse.
Okay. That's a topic that's going to come up again, it sounds like, and something that commissioners need to think about. It's something that you and I are going to have some conversations with people about who knows where it's going to go, but as we go down the road here.
Ben, one thing if I could point out that maybe it's self-evident, but in order to increase revenue, it may require our cost structure to go up. In other words, the payoff is down the road. So a percentage decrease that's set, or targets anyway that are set, that may be possible, but have to understand the vagaries of doing so, especially given the fact that we may have to borrow money, we have to use reserves, we may have to increase our operating costs in the near term to get to the payoff in the medium term.
Yeah, spend money to make money. I think just having the goal itself of reducing reliance, and we've talked about it for years, we need to operate as much as possible, more and more as if the bridge doesn't exist. If we still want to continue being a port and we think we can offer this valuable service to the community, which I think we can, but we just, as a goal, I don't know if we insist that you hit an actual number benchmark. I don't know that that's going to be possible every single year, but having the overriding and overreaching goal to continually push to rely less, I think in itself is a good idea.
Just one quick question, Daryl, how many boathouses are there?
11.
And Daryl, how many of them do you think may be discharging to the marina?
You know, I can't say for sure what they have going on inside of them because I haven't personally, I've only been inside one of them. So
And in that one, you found what?
the one that I was in, I found a dishwasher and their sink, they did not have a bathroom. I did that inspection with John Mann when the boathouse was up for sale. We went through it with the owner and told them that they would need to, they have to put a bucket and they're supposed to be hauling out their gray water, which they hadn't been. And then that was a deterrent to the person who was looking to buy it because they didn't really realize that they weren't supposed to have, you know, plumbing being discharged into the marina.
Okay. Should we talk about the bridge a little bit?
Yeah, so we're starting with the capital maintenance plan. The memo, what we tried to do is identify some specific issues that the commission should be aware of. And it's really seen by this graphic. I'm going to just mention a couple things here. The highlighted areas, the ones that are, well, there's two Ds on this, but the A, B, C, and D1 and D2. The A, B, and C, and D are the primary capital projects that we're seeing coming up. And the commission knows about these. The first one is the bridge deck overlays. That is intended to take place this spring. Our rough cut number there is about $600,000. So that's a have to. We got to get to that. When you go down to B, that's the set aside. I'm sorry, where is it? Rack pinion shafts. It's a new B. Yeah, so that's, sorry, I've got a different one in front of me. So replace the rack pinion shafts, that's associated with the last inspection of the movable lift span. That's not a big number, but it's also one that's not firm. We're carrying $250,000 for that. C is a big one. That's the wire rope replacement. And you can see that that would fall in this model in the fiscal year 2023. We're carrying $1.6 million for that. And then down below under miscellaneous other D, that's the set aside, the placeholder, as it were, that Fred mentioned for some funding to bring the weight limit back up. We're carrying $1 million. We'll know in January what our engineers are saying, but this is a number that we put in this model that flows back into the 10-year financial model. And again, it's an assumption that's a placeholder that will be further clarified when we see the engineer's report. And then if you pull back a little bit, you see the second D is really just a accumulation or an aggregation of a whole set of projects, some of which have very high price tags on them. And this just illustrates that fundamental challenge the commission has faced for the last several years, where we're trying to find that right place where we're investing adequately in the bridge. So we're keeping on top of the major capital maintenance items that need to be carried out. We're keeping the bridge safe and operational, but we're not spending too much money or more than we should on capital projects, because we're trying to make sure we're not overspending, assuming that the bridge replacement effort is successful. But once you get into 2027-ish, 6-ish, and beyond, there needs to be some pretty serious decisions made about the sort of comparison of where we are in bridge replacement and what we need to put into the current bridge to keep it safe and operational. So it's an ongoing annual thought process, looking at what expenses we know we have to carry out and what things we can reasonably defer. I should have said, for those of you, I think all of you have seen this, but this is a 30-year model. This is based on the assumption that with all the proper inspections and the proper maintenance and the proper capital maintenance projects, but for a seismic event or potentially a barge strike, this bridge can be operational for a long period of time. It's not the objective, to be clear, it's not our intent, but we have to be able to reasonably anticipate how to keep the current bridge operational for as long as we can see. The first part, or the first half of this chart, is capital projects. The color coding is the relative priority or severity. And then there's an approximate cost estimate that's embedded in that color, which is derived from the engineer's report and their expertise. And then down below is the whole tranche of activities that take place relative to inspections and maintenance. If you look to the lift span M&E, you see three dark colored bars. No, under inspections and maintenance. Over to your right, yeah. So those are the significant series of inspections that have just taken place. Those were very expensive, but very thorough. So this is a tool, it's a model, it's linked to the other spreadsheets that Fred talked about, but it's the best way we have to anticipate what's coming on the bridge, how much to spend, and how to stay on top of it. And so when you look at the key issues that were listed here, those are ones that I thought the commission should be aware of and have a chance to talk about or consider, and you may wish to at this time.
Any questions from Michael or clarification needed on that?
Just an observation. I think the port's done a great job trying to maintain the existing bridge. The number of inspections are informing us how that thing is aging out. And that's the last thing I believe we should try and cut back on. We got to make sure. I think our priority for us as a port is to maintain the bridge in a safe operating condition, so we don't hurt anybody on that bridge as long as we need it. And I think that is what the port folks have done, and accolades to them on doing that. I think we've got to work this with accelerating and getting a new bridge in place so we don't have to spend that big money in the out years on this thing. We're just, my mind, we're dumping money down a rat hole. So we got to be very careful how we spend the limited funds we have, but it's got to be, we got to maintain a safe operating condition for the people that use the bridge. So.
Yeah, I'll just say that's well said and much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you from the maintenance department as well, Commissioner Fox.
Well deserved.
I think it's important to note that, we're about 4 or 5 years away from some projects that we intentionally deferred, but are very substantial in our planning and our thinking. And then the one that Michael mentioned that I have a question on, the getting the load rating raised once again. Michael, we have, would you say $1 million as a placeholder number right now? Where's that at?
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember seeing that too.
I guess my question on that is, I assume once we get that number and it's presented to us, we're also going to see how many trips that will allow. My point being, if it's $1 million and it's 2 trips a month versus if it's 2,000 trips a month, is going to matter in our decision making. I assume that's all part of the exact same presentation.
Yes, but I would say that that's one metric. It's also simply the impact on some of the major businesses around here. We're staying in touch with them. They're very keenly interested, and if it's possible to get it back up. So there's a financial feasibility, and it's tied in part to trips, it's part to freight, it's tied part to impacts to major businesses.
Oh, absolutely. But my point being, we're going to be asking the taxpayers of Hood River to foot the bill for something. We need to be able to answer the question. So, and supporting business is what I want to do, but we need to know the answer to that question.
Yeah, understood.
And in addition to that, John, man, you made a mention a while back when we were doing the re-welding of the grating on the bridge, that you were able to get that welding done quicker and sooner. And you attributed at least part of it to the load limit on the bridge and the speed reduction of the heavy loads going across the bridge. So when we're doing this evaluation to crank the load back up, we need to consider what that's going to do to the grading as well.
I think there's a few elements that play into that, Commissioner Fox, and one of them is a long-term welding program we've been doing of 8-point welds. The one thing we don't know about that 8-point weld program is where are we transferring that energy to right now? And that hasn't come out yet. But somewhere on that deck, all we're doing by that is changing where that energy gets loaded. So somewhere something's going to happen. So I would very much agree with that statement that we need to stay on top of that and consider that as we come back up. The loads appear, the light loads that really appear to be making a difference.
If we come back up.
Correct.
Ben, could I add one more point here? It's mentioned in the memo, but if you look at just the wire rope replacement project itself, and we're carrying 1.6 million and another 600,000 for the deck repaving, that has to be funded somehow. So within the 10-year financial model, we're making some assumptions about how it's funded. It's optimally, we would not incur debt for those expenses, but to do so, we would have to use reserves. So if there's net 3.2 million or so that's available, that the reserves will be increasing every month, but we also will need to use a fair bit of that for these capital projects. In addition to that, we've made a commitment to provide, I think it's 1.2 million for the local match to the build grant. So again, it gets complex, but the point is that we have to pay for these projects. We have to make sure we have sufficient funds to pay for them. I not recommend incurring debt, rather taking it from our reserves. And that's one reason why when you saw Fred's roll-up 10-year model, you saw the net reserves, X real estate proceeds, but above the 10% net depreciable asset, it narrows down to $600,000 in a couple of years. So it's something we have to watch carefully, and we have to make sure we have a game plan for paying these significant capital projects.
And is there another section of key issues, or is that covered within?
Well, I thought the ones that are most important are listed in the memo.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any more? We're gonna, after this is gonna be bridge replacement. Any commissioners have any comments or want to chat about anything else on the existing bridge before we move on?
I have just one quick comment, and it's more for the bridge and other projects, and just something that I really want us to be mindful of is that I think that small business owners are seeing, and you guys are seeing supply chain issues and some creeping up of inflation. And I think that it would be wise for the port in their fiscal projections to assume more inflation versus typical inflation over the next few years. Because models are kind of showing that things might get a little crazy.
Yeah, really good point.
True. All right, let's talk about New Bridge.
All right. Good afternoon. I am tasked with bringing forth the bridge replacement project and some of the key items that have been identified in the strategic work plan. One of the things that was a little bit challenging with this effort was that you almost have to work backwards as much as you work from today forward. And one of the things that we identified with this concept schedule was that there's a long run-up time for financing. And so, as we look at the notice to proceed for construction, there's a huge amount of assumptions that are made in this document. We've been working very closely with WSP through the NEPA and the preliminary cost estimates. Steve Siegel has provided great input on the governance and finance, Stantec on traffic and revenue, and other consultants. But there's really, 6 what I think are really big issues that we should talk about, and I'm interested in getting some feedback. And one is the tribal compensatory agreements. As noted in the past, Federal Highways is the lead agency on that. We're meeting bi-monthly, that being Federal Highways, ODOT, looking at the loss of fishing access sites and acknowledgement of the easements. And I think that this is an issue that will push back the final EIS, but luckily it's not going to keep a lot of the other elements from starting up. So I don't see that as being a huge drag on other elements of the project. One area that I think is a real bright point is the Bi-State Bridge Authority legislation has gained steam in both states. And so we will be seeing that legislation introduced in the 22 session. And if things follow through and the 6 local governments adopt the formation agreements in the middle of next year, the new bridge authority would formally be in existence in mid 2023. So that's been a great, some great progress there. One thing that we've heard a lot about is avoiding the lapses in project funding. That continues to be a concern. 15 million is great, but it's not going to get us where we need to be. So I have identified that really the key milestone for the end of that 15 million is tagged with the end of the 30% engineering. So the $15 million that we currently have lines up, if you will, with the end of the completion of that 30% engineering. So it's going to be really critical that we get the additional tranche of funding, whether it's at a minimum of $30 million, 9 to 12 months in advance. So that really puts the onus on that 2023 long session as really the best opportunity to get significant funding for this project. Not to say that we can't get more funding in the 22 session, and we plan on doing so and applying for grants, but we really want to avoid that gap. The other item is the selection of the RBMC. A lot of the project movement, I anticipate, will increase once we have the RBMC in place. I have received comments from ODOT. They've asked for the document to conform to their agency's typical templates. So that's something that we're doing and hoping to get back to them shortly. The other item is the meeting the construction notice to proceed in the fourth quarter of 26. We're certainly looking for opportunities all the time to speed up these processes. One of the key elements of the notice to proceed for construction is the in-water work window, which ranges from October to March. So you really have to work backwards from that October 1 date. And that's where December of the preceding year becomes a critical point for making sure that you hit that in-water work window. So based on all of the financing and other project elements, right now, this concept schedule shows the notice to proceed in December, fourth quarter of 2026. So it can hit the October 27 in-water work window. And finally, the relocation of the port buildings. We talked a little bit about this issue as part of the land use report, maybe about 6 or 9 months ago. It appears that the jump off point into the water for the derricks and the construction to get out into the river will likely take place right to the north of the current maintenance shop. And so we really have to work backwards to, if we need to, relocate the administration building and the maintenance building. We're really looking at, in early 2023 in starting the architectural work for determining where a new admin building would be located and identifying a location for the maintenance shop. So this is really the intent of this schedule. If you want to just scroll down to the next scroll, there's a couple different versions of this timeline. One is kind of a higher end roll up, and then the one on the next page is broken down a little bit more. If you can scroll down to that, Genevieve. And within each of these subcategories are additional work items, and that's what's keeping me busy during the day. So the blue diamonds are the key milestones for each of these elements. We've seen different versions of the concept schedule since 2017, if not earlier. And we're not too far off. We're making adjustments. We're adding more detail. And I will continue to use this as the driving factor for my work plan and making sure that all of these elements get done in a timely fashion. Certainly don't want to take up any more of your time. So if there's any questions about specific items or the elements in the schedule, I'd be more than happy to listen.
I think Commissioner Fox probably has the most day-to-day interaction on this one. I've got a couple of questions. I know he does too. Does any other commissioner want to kick it off though before we get going? The Commissioner Fox, I'm going to see if you have the same questions that I do. Go right ahead.
Okay. So first off, this is a surprise about the RBMC. I'm a little disappointed that I didn't get a phone call, Kevin, that we got a problem with ODOT. So we'll resolve that after the meeting. Big picture, first off, the estimate on this bridge is nearly complete now. It's in final review. But let me give you the high point takeaways. We now have a document and we have a program that explains how we're going to go build this bridge, at least one version of it. The purpose of this is then to go ahead and work towards it. And as we find issues that we can't afford, we can work ahead and try and figure out options to cheapen up the bridge. Why do I say that? The current price of the bridge as of about a week ago, and we knew it was going to change a little bit from last week, is sitting at $506 million. That's $506 million. Okay, and that's going to be a real funding challenge. Now that gives us a bridge. It conforms to what the conceptual design showed on the EIS and all of the issues that we've been fussing with thus far. Some of the key elements that make up this $5.6 million, other than the straight estimate of the work, is that engineering is estimated at 6% of the gross construction project cost. Engineering support of construction is based on another 2%. So engineering support total of the project that we're trying to go out for bid with next year is about 6% of the total price. The second component of this thing is contingency. Contingency for this type of an estimate, which is classified as a class 4 estimate based on how much design we've got, should range to a high of 50% contingency. We've selected 30%. I personally feel that's probably in the ballpark as long as we manage it. And we manage it carefully, we could probably bring it in for about that price. We're going to spend the 30%. The last major element is inflation. So escalation is going to be a factor in this type of work. The past estimate was predicated on 2% per year compounded on inflation. That's just, it's too low for the market today and what we see in the future. I felt more comfortable somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5%. Back in the 70s, if some of you are around there long enough, like old Fred, and I can say it, I was too, you know, we're talking in the neighborhood of 10+% escalation per year. In some cases, a lot more than that. We were building a nuclear power plant at 18%. So you can just guess how much that adds to a $2 billion project. So after we discussed it for quite a while, we agreed on 4%. So with the understanding that at the end of the year, at the end of each year, we'll look back and see what the actual inflation rate was, and we'll have to make an adjustment up or down off of that estimate. So we got an estimate of about a little over $5 billion. The key takeaway from that is time is money. That's predicated on a schedule that basically says we're going to award the Rbmc soon. We're going to get a design contract awarded mid next year. We will award a construction contract about 3 years later. And the bridge will be open for traffic on October 1, 2028. There are some real key things that we've got to watch as we move through this project, and that's the in-water work. As we build the bridge, we have to hit that in-water work windows. If we miss it, we basically extend the project a year. So it's going to be very critical that we get the precursor work ready to go and done. So when we hit that in-water work windows, we're ready to move right in, get it done, then get out, kind of a thing. So there's a whole bunch of things that we've learned going through this estimate that I think is going to help us as we move this project forward. The challenge that I see, as soon as we get this Rbmc contract in place, I think some of the things that we want that contractor to look at is alternate methodologies to possibly cheapen up the price. And that could be precast, that could be lots of different things. We may even have to look at narrowing down the bridge. Right now, as you know, we've got two 12-foot lanes, a third 12-foot lane for pedestrian and bicycles, and then two 8-foot buffer lanes, if I remember all this right. All of that leads to a wide deck and a deep deck, and all of that costs a lot of money. So if we can't get the funding, another option is, do we need to start trimming things back? That has lots of ramifications on EIS permitting and so on that we're all going to have to take into consideration. But it's going to be a big project, and we need to really push hard on this thing and get it going and get that momentum building. Because every year, what's in the $500 million project right now is over $100 million in escalation. So if you bump it another year, it's going up another 4% compounded. So that's kind of the big story there. We got to figure a way to sell this thing and get funding.
Yeah, absolutely. You didn't take my questions. Two things that Kevin said that I'm curious about, and I knew I'd refer back to Fred's spreadsheet, and I'm going to. We talked about a couple of months ago, more than likely the port office's shop, everything having to be removed. I think, yeah, that's going to happen. I'd like to know where you think you're going to put it. And also, you said something about needing to know in I'm paraphrasing what I heard, needing to know in 2023 or knowing in 23 and needing to do something. My second question is, why in the world we're spending $140,000 next year on port office building if 2 years from now we're going to have to be talking about building another one? So 2 questions.
Yeah, so I think I can take a stab at the relocation. So the assumption that we made for the preliminary cost estimate that Commissioner Fox was referring to was the location of the current Marina One building, the old chamber building, that site was included as the site for the new administration building. That building is showing its age, and so that it might be an opportunity to remove that building and replace it with the admin building. That's just an assumption. It doesn't mean that that's necessarily where it's going to be, but that was the assumption.
Okay, and timing wise, because we wouldn't spend $140,000 on the existing building if we're just going to be building something different in a year or two.
Yeah, so if you're looking at that notice to proceed in late 26, you kind of want to work backwards. So, construction would be taking place in 2025.
And so the $140,000 on the current building in 2022 is absolutely critical.
No, let me weigh in. Ben, that's it's a really good point. That's where we haven't caught up with all the assumptions that are in our budget or in our proposed budget. Certainly the redo of part of the port office to plus it up for storage and other things, that would not happen if the assumption holds that we're going to relocate. Absolutely correct.
Okay, and I understand that in the planning phase, if you were required to make assumptions and state assumptions as far as where certain things would be, where certain things can do, it's going to need to be a discussion. I, speaking only for myself, don't think I would ever support putting in a new office where the marina building is. I think there's far higher and better uses for that area. I'd want to put new port offices and shops out at the airport. My line, it doesn't matter right now as far as conversation. Am I assuming correctly that you had to state something as an assumption, but that can be changed in the future?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. That's all I need to know.
A working assumption, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Just to jump in a little bit, the one area that, it's an assumption in the estimate associated with this. At some point in time, we need to plan that we're going to have an external review of this estimate when we're asking for this kind of money. It may or may not show up, but something that just doesn't quite pass the giggle test to me is if we're going to replace the port administration building, why do we need to increase it by 100% in size when the port activities over the duration is probably going to drop? So the giggle test to me is, why are we building an office building that's going to be twice the size of the existing one, when over the longer term, the size should actually be going down, not up? So I think that's something that before we finalize this estimate, we may want to take a look at and adjust that. Because somebody looking from the outside looking at it, that just doesn't look right.
And if those are all things we can adjust as we move forward, I guess, again, if it's just a placeholder and it can be adjusted, fine.
Yep.
As long as
There's lots of things in that estimate that we're going to want to change over time.
Sure. I do want, unless any other commissioners have something they'd like to talk about on this particular subject, I would like to give Greg a chance. We've got the time is, I guess we're doing pretty good on time, actually. I'd like to give Greg a chance to talk about real estate development, but any other commissioners have any comments here that they'd like to offer? No.
I was just thinking the same thing you already said, Ben, that anything waterfront or marina front, I would hope we would be a little more creative than just moving offices into it.
I think we'll all look forward to having that discussion.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, appreciate it. All right, Greg, let's talk about real estate.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you had a chance to proof the issue paper. You'll see the way that I structured it. Just to give a little bit of background, some of the previous efforts that the port has gone through, something to help guide some of the development decisions and help us focus on a greater revenue generation. Things like the real estate asset strategy, implementation of the triple net lease strategy, and then also the strategic business plan. Just to give a little bit of a synopsis below that, if you drop down, Jen, it's just kind of some of the prevailing themes. It's something that we've talked about throughout this entire exercise today, and it's about continuity for the port, development of sustainable practices, and seeking new properties to acquire, so that way we can continue to develop our assets inventory. Moving down, it's just a quick a quick layout of some of the current efforts, some of the major efforts that are taking place at this time. And actually, Jen, if you just keep scrolling all the way down, I think just as time being a consideration, these are some of the key issues in the sense that they've been subject matters that have come up, and felt that it would be prudent to have a good conversation or receive guidance as to how the port would like to proceed, because at some point the conversation differed from what previous directives were. And so I thought it might be advantageous to have a discussion about it. With that, I'll kick it back to the commission and look forward to your comments.
Questions, comments?
I'll jump in again. If you look at, again, strategically, direction from the commission to the port, your item number 1, I think, is a great one. I know we've had a lot of discussion informally about what we would like to see down there. And I know there's some of us would like to get the zoning changed where we can have commercial type efforts down there, like restaurants and other small business. I think that the port I mean, the commissioners ought to come with a recommendation or a discussion that says, we want to proceed that way and develop a plan, have the port develop a plan of how do we change the zoning that would allow us to do something like that. And I think it's more than just down there at, and where we're talking about. I think we're maybe also talking around Marina Green and maybe long-term, if we take the port administration building down, what would we replace it with? My personal opinion, that'd be a great spot for a nice restaurant. Beautiful views of the marina and the river. But do we want to try and push and change the zoning?
Let me jump in there, Mike, just to make sure everybody's clear on what is zoned what, and Michael's going to correct me where I'm wrong. The Barman lot is not our only commercial lot on the waterfront. The entire Marina Green, those two buildings there, DMV, all of that down to the port office. I'm not sure the port office is included in this or not, but I'm pretty sure all the rest of it, that's all commercial land, all of it. The light industrial land we have outside Barman is the port. Now, personally, I don't know about changing all of the lot one into commercial. Could you even do it? Because there'd have to be some trade there of some kind. They're not going to just let you do it, I don't think. But do we want to? Because I can see trip counts getting out of hand within about 2 minutes, and that's not being able to build much down there at all. But we do have a significant amount of commercial land. That's kind of a tomorrow conversation, but we do have it.
Yeah, I'll chime in. You're absolutely correct. The property that is circumvents or surrounds the marina proper is commercially zoned. So you could theoretically put in retail and or food and beverage. And also, according to the waterlay or waterfront overlay, there's an opportunity to introduce retail down along Nichols Basin, which was bullet 4 of the key issues. As far as changing the zoning from lot 1 from light industrial to a commercial opportunity, you're right. There likely would be some horse trading. There are some unknowns because it's not our decision to make. We would have to make our pitch to the city of Hood River. It would also include a new traffic study through ODOT and also an adaptation of the waterfront zone overlay. So there would be a significant amount of effort. It's not unsurmountable, but there are a lot of unknowns, and it has a community perception that should be considered with regard to changing that to a commercial zone. Positives and negatives in both sides. And so it's an interesting concept. I don't think it's the first time it's been broached, but it does come with some significant efforts to accomplish.
I know the urban renewal group has been really interested in lot 1 as well. So I think the city would be really interested in talking about the development of that in something other than light industrial.
Or some, yeah.
Now, regarding the Marina Green, that's good news that it's commercial now. I would just be a little cautious of how quick we develop that, because I think we're not done talking about that as a potential laydown area.
Oh, I think that all comes after bridge for development over there, be my guess, just common sense wise. Yeah. But I mean, as far as lot 1 is concerned in that area, we have instructed staff to go forward with infrastructure, with getting the money together, putting that infrastructure in, cutting anchor way across, getting us ready for development. I don't know that I don't know that we want to be changing that as far as what we're going to be doing over the next year or so, down there preparing for eventual development. Is that accurate?
I would say so. It doesn't preclude options for future development. It has no bearing on the zoning, whatever future zoning that might take. It introduces the infrastructure, and so in many ways it greases the skids to an extent.
Okay. I agree with that. Keep going with the infrastructure to be ready. But if it's going to take us 3 or 4 years to get a zoning change, if that's what we want to do, or we want to think about, we ought to start that effort earlier than later.
Why do we
And
want
may-
a zoning? First time I've heard this on lot one. This is just the first time I've heard this. Why do we want a zoning change?
Why not?
Well, it depends what we decide what we want to do there. We're putting in utilities, we're putting in infrastructure. What do we want to do there and what can we do there? I'd like to know what can we do before we start pushing to change zoning.
If we decide, if we could get it commercial, do we want to put an event center down there for music and plays and the rest of the stuff?
As a example, my only point would be, can we, if the answer is yes, can we do that with the existing zoning before we spend money trying to change zoning? Is my only point, not specifically what we would do.
Okay.
Yeah, if we are creative in the usability of the space, light industrial still does have opportunities for some commercial limited sections to them based upon what the light industrial is. So could we work within the parameters to check off all of the boxes to create some sort of a recreational facility plus light industrial? Because I do know that they're, I'm talking to builders around town. Hood River and the Gorge area in general is really, really short on their light industrial properties. And so they would be in very high demand. But I agree with you that it's a showcase enough property that I think we need to be creative on how we can best maximize its use.
Yeah, exactly right. And outside of lot one, remember that on that in that area down there, we have the maritime site over there. Is that what I'm talking about? Down the hook. Yeah. Maritime site. We have a spot we can build something in front of Jensen. We have lot 5. We have all these spots down there where we can build light industrial stuff already. So the opportunities there, no matter what you do in lot 1, we can still build tens of thousands of square feet down there before that even starts. So we have, to Commissioner Fox's point, we have options as far as what we do without, I think, limiting and what we do. And we're going to have to start thinking lower handles and airport for light industrial development as well.
It seems like we could have an entire planning session just on this one topic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Ben, can I clarify one thing? So the commission's clear, it's not in fact accurate that Marina Green is zoned commercial.
Just the buildings themselves and the paved area over there?
Now, if we had a map, I'd show you, but there's a north-south line that runs about 25% westerly of the eastern edge of Marina Green. That is zoned commercial. So the buildings, the gravel lot, and that strip, that call it 20-25% of Marina Green, is zoned commercial. The balance of that, all the way around museum and all the way to Marina Park, that's all open space.
Okay.
And it's pretty much sacrosanct. So there's the opportunity lies in where those existing buildings are in the gravel lot.
So there's around acres of commercial in there ish somewhere.
Right, but it is true that commercial zoning extends all the way over here to the bridge. So where we are, the port offices is CG.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Everything past the museum is open space. So I didn't mean to misrepresent.
I like what we're doing. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about as far as specifics on what we're going to do, but it's going to be not too far down the road, but a little bit down the road. But I think I like the direction is getting us to that point as quickly as possible, which sounds like we're doing.
So if I could clarify, one aspect of what you mentioned is to better characterize to the commission what's allowable within the current LI zone. And I'm talking about lot 1 right now. The refinement plan added a modicum of commercial by right allowed uses, about 1,800 square feet, I think. And then there is a limit to, but also allowed, you can sell what you make, which is in the current zoning code. So that refinement plan was intended to loosen the code to allow some by right commercial uses. But the way the LI zone is also interpreted in the city of Hood River, it allows for effectively office space that's tied to manufacturing. So think about Decline. They were occupied a large building. They had offices, marketing, R&D, accounting, all that, but they manufactured overseas. So that allows for commercial or office uses within certain limits within the LI zone. What it currently doesn't allow is anything more in terms of restaurants or retail space or professional services and things like that above that 1,800 square foot per building limit. My point is simply that if we took the step and prepared just simply characterizing the current zoning, so the commission's aware of what's allowed in the current zone, and then we also took a CG zone and just basically showed what could occur there, you'd have a sort of a side-by-side comparison. And then we might also list the steps that would take and the rough timeframes if the commission wanted to initiate or at least consider initiating a zone change there, because they are significant. The biggest being the traffic model that is tied to the IAMP. But to just simply lay that out as factually so the commission has something to consider. Is that a fair to-do list item?
I think it'd be very helpful as we start to have these discussions, because I think the commission's got some different ideas than perhaps historical about what would be best suited where, down on the water and everywhere, quite honestly, on all of our properties. And I think having that information to reference would be really nice and would be helpful.
And perhaps that could be, we could look ahead to call it a planning session, but something within one of our regular scheduled meetings to focus on that topic.
Absolutely. And it's going to, it's going to be really hard. And we've talked about this before. It's going to be hard to commit to project A on the waterfront without knowing how it affects the potential for projects B and C when it comes to how much space have we used within a zoning, what trip counts we're eating up. We need to know kind of if we have some reference points or things we're going to need to know before we okay or decide on a course of action. That's going to be really helpful.
Would you like us to also just have staff level interaction with the planning director? Get some thoughts, some feedback
on how he's going to interpret, or because we're not talking about a specific project of any kind, but yeah, how would he interpret zoning as it relates to that, all the property down there? That would be helpful. Sure.
Okay.
Another question to me, this whole area begs is, do we have a strategy and a timeline for finishing the development of the port area? Do we all think that we're going to be done in 20 years, 10 years, 50 years? Do we have a view of that?
We do not have that.
It would seem like it would be helpful if we had a plot that showed, and I know we got it, showed all of the space yet that we need to develop. And then strategically, we sit back and we start thinking about, okay, this chunk ought to go first, that second, that third, that fourth, and then put together a very gross timeline that says, okay, we want to have development in this area done by about this time frame. That then forces a whole bunch of decisions and activities that we have to take to get it done. Right now, it sounds like there's no end date. It's just when we get there. And maybe that's okay.
I would say, Commissioner, that we do have, the commission has given very specific direction. Greg's gone over that in his memo. And there are several pieces, such as the maritime building that's has a current lease Jensen Building has current leases and that sort of thing. And so it's subject to market conditions and the cost of money and all sorts of things. But that's never that sort of holistic, figure out a rough game plan for every property. That's never been done since I've been here. I know that. But I would say finally that the ability to have even a rough cut schedule is sort of dependent upon what capacity we have to facilitate development and to what extent strategically we enter into partnerships, sell property, lease property, because we simply do not have the capital to develop everything, that's for sure. Pretty obvious thing that I think.
Yeah, I think that was a point that we've talked about before is, do we wait for people to come to us and say we have an idea for this property? Or do we say this is the building we're going to build and we build it and they come? And I think both strategies have pros and cons to them when you're working with an outside, an outside business to build something more custom to them versus we say this is what we're going to build and people will fill the spaces. So I think that's going to be a big question of how we are going to look to move forward. And I agree with Michael that market conditions and the cost of money and all that is going to drive a significant portion of that. It's looking at bids from Lower Mill, a few years ago, I think that we were all under the impression, or you all were under the impression, that building up there was going to be very feasible. And now looking at the numbers, it's a very different story. So there's just a lot of unknowns.
And I just would mention that, and Commissioner Chapman, you alluded to it, but a couple, 3 years ago, Fred would have said we've got, I'm going to ballpark it, $12 million of total debt capacity, and take out half of that for bridge, and we've got net $6 million to work with. That's what our CFO would say. That's what we're comfortable in terms of leveraging ourselves. It's just a ballpark number, but when you distribute that leverage capacity to commercial hangar and to lot one, for example, it starts to go pretty fast. So in the future, especially given bridge replacement, the ability to affect change on the waterfront and develop it will be largely connected to decisions the commission makes about ground leasing, selling property, or engaging in public-private partnerships, because we simply don't have the capacity to do much beyond that $6 million limit.
Well, and I think your 6 million has got a lifespan to it.
Yeah.
You don't have that 6 million forever. And if you look at, if we adopt the milestones that I suggested, it's a lot sooner than later. So we either got to figure out a different way of developing property, which I think we got to figure a different way of developing property, a different model that we're going to have to put in place, because you're not going to have the $6 million to rely on.
I think that's coming sooner than later. We have the larger property down there, the Maritime. Oh, there's a lease. We're not developing that, but as soon as that lease is over, we might decide to do something. Lot one, we're moving forward with infrastructure. Then you're going to be able to decide to do something. Lot one, all along commercial, if you choose to, along the boat basin. There's going to be a lot of decisions and a lot of choices coming up fairly quickly. And I think the commission's given the right direction, like get us there as quickly as possible, get us there. And I guess the question I have for the commission is, everybody happy with that path, getting us to that point as quickly as we can, which is infrastructure, which is getting all this together so we can make specific decisions about what goes there and how we're going to do it. I think that's the direction we're going. Is the commission still happy with that, I guess is my question.
Yes, Commissioner Strike. I'd like to add a caveat here that bear in mind that your commission board changes every 2 years. And this will be my 4th direction that I'll be involved in waterfront. Michael's been involved with 3. Taking consideration when you develop property and you're the sole owner of it and you control the outcome of it, and it's not going to be a 2-year window that you control it, then your decision is different. But I said, I've said here, and I see the same thing over and over again, that we now have a new vision for the waterfront, which we've had 3 prior that I've been involved in, maybe 4. And so you got to consider that, Ben, what you think is appropriate right now may not be appropriate in 5 years. And that's the key element that we're missing here. And Michael will vouch for that, that he has been here through all this time, but he has had different presidents, different vice presidents, and different board members all that period of time. So we've got to really consider what we're doing, because the 4 or 5 people we work with right now may not be here in 2 years. More likely it won't be. So it's going to change every 2 years for you.
Obi, I think that's an absolute great comment, and it's good that you're grounding us back on reality here a little bit. One thing that I see is that I'd like to see options, realizing that the world has changed for the port. 5 years ago, we had this vision of when this bridge was going to shut down and a new one was going to be in place. But it was way out in the future. So it really didn't impact in what we wanted to do that much. We can see the end of that now, and we can see that we can't rely on that revenue stream much longer. We still have a lot of property to develop. How do we do it? Give us some other alternatives that protect all of us, but still get the property developed. And I don't have that answer.
Well, Mike, what I'm saying, Mike, is that we had this conversation with the past 2 boards, and we had a vision, and we had it zoned. We were dealt a certain cards in our hand, and we acted on that, and we spent money, good capital, surveys, studies to move forward. And a new board came in, and now it's changing again. So that's one of the big dilemmas you have to really consider, is that no matter how much you think your vision is correct today, you may not have input in 2 years.
True, but you do know what the finances are going to kind of look like.
What you have to understand, Mike, is that the finances are up to interpretation of the board where they want to go. They're still the same finances no matter who is on the board, but it's the direction the board wants to spend that money.
Where I was coming from, Hobie, is that you're not going to have the bridge revenue to help fund these other things, not only directly or tying it to debt. It's not going to be there.
Well, Mike, I don't think the development was tied to the bridge revenue. At this point, in the last 2 commissions, we've had the decision made that we know we can't go any more further in debt with the revenue stream from the bridge. We know that, and we're making our decisions based on that. So everything developed on the waterfront was going to be self-sufficient or through grants.
I understand what you're saying, Hobie. Absolutely. I don't have any illusion that I will be on this board when the last decision is made, when what's going to be built specifically on a spot on the waterfront. And I think just directionally right now, I just want to make sure that getting to the place where we can build something, call it on lot 1 specifically, is the direction that we want to move still. And I haven't heard anybody say that's not, what we build and how we do it, but I haven't heard anybody say that's not the direction we want to go in. Mike, is that correct?
Was that to me, Ben?
It's to anybody. I just want to make sure.
Well, and that's the way we've been characterizing it in our funding requests, is that this infrastructure work and the street relocation and the street construction has to happen regardless of the uses on the development itself. So that is, that's the sure thing. That's the sure, easy decision to make going forward in the next couple of years if we can raise the money.
Are we satisfied with the marina itself development, or are we looking at doing some expansion down there within the marina itself?
The commercial aspect of it or the actual marina boat basin area?
The actual boat basin. I mean, we're kind of talking about real estate development. This is kind of slightly different, but it's still development.
I don't know if there's, Daryl, is there much more capacity in the water for more marina development?
Oh, there is. You could extend A dock and we could extend B dock. We could put something around the perimeter. There were several, not necessarily proposals, but studies done back in Brian Short's days of different visions for the marina, and then a few different pro formas done on what it would take as far as the rents we would have to charge and the cost of putting the slips in. It is super expensive for the permitting and the pilings and the docks themselves, but as far as the space, there's a lot you could do. We would just have to designate the area how we want to use it. Like right now, we like having it open because they've got the kids sailing program, so you can use the inside of the basin for that. But there's definitely a lot of opportunity to expand with slips. It's just then figuring out the uplands part of it of, okay, more slips, more parking, more people, all the way around. How are we going to manage that? So I think Michael can help me out on that one as far as the west side of the marina over by the marina park. I think that's a little tricky as far as what we can actually do over there with putting docks in, but we can build off what we have for sure.
Yeah, no, Daryl, they summarized it very well. The master plan we have shows extensions of A and B docks, so you could do that expansion using existing infrastructure. That means utilities, that means parking, but maybe that drives another 50 to 60 spaces at most, probably more like 40 to 50. But to do anything more than that, you really have to, as Daryl said, you have to establish a new beachhead. You have to have a new launch or a new ramp. You have to establish new parking. The one area that's always been out there that we've never really talked about in great detail, but we have here today a bit, is the whole commercially zoned area at the southeast quadrant of the marina. Because the vision there could be a whole variety of uses, including retail, possibly some housing, could be connected with a new ramp to a new smaller but slips. So there's a vision there that hasn't been fleshed out, but it certainly is an opportunity. So it's proximate to the freeway, got great access. So there's a lot of going for it. But it would have to be consistent with and compatible with recreational uses on the waterfront. And we could certainly not capitalize a project like that.
I'm sure if you call it Bridge Village, you'd find all kinds of investors that want to come in there and help out with something like that. And I think a lot of that would probably is either post bridge or post what we know is going to be needed and happen with a new bridge in those areas. But Greg, I need you to direct this conversation to the airport, please. But we still keep about real estate, and commissioners can ask whatever they want, but I'd like to move it to the airport so we can stay on time.
Copy that. I appreciate the guidance on real estate. Moving on to the airport. You just see, I structured it much the same way, just a little bit of an overview on what the previous efforts have been, some of the expenditures and capital that we put forth, some of the efforts to develop airport layout plans. So that way we're in conformance with FAA guidelines. We're able to still seek the grant fundings. Moving on down, that is the latest list of projects that we've requested through the AIP program, which is the FAA Airport Improvement Program. So that those are projects that we're requesting grant funding for. We haven't been blessed with that funding, but those are the projects that we're looking for in the near future and hope to receive that funding for. Again, that's a 10% match. So it's not absolutely free, but it is a way that we can capitalize projects at the airport without a lot of expenditures. Moving along, some of the current efforts. I won't spend too much time on this because I want to be respectful of some of the other conversations that need to take place. But you'll see some of the efforts that the port has been going through to make sure that the airport is moving in a successful direction, ideally towards self-sustainability. And if we just get right into the key issues, these are driven right out of conversations that have taken place. That Jen, if you could just scroll down just the key issues. Thank you. Conversations that take place, and just seeking conversation and future or further guidance on how we want to address these things in the near future. I can certainly go through each one, but I again, if everyone has reviewed it, then I would push it back into the commission's field and love to hear what you guys think.
The item I get the most questions on and the most interest in from the community, and it's not even close, is construction of T-hangers. And there seem to be, from the people that approach me that I do and don't know, and a huge appetite for people to lease some land and build a T-hanger out there. And the demand seems to be really high. I understand that there have been some poor leases in the past, one way or another. Leases just weren't all that advantageous in the past. How can we construct a land lease structure, since we can't build everything ourselves? How can we construct a land lease structure that returns to the port in a certain reasonable period of time, an asset and not a dump, and is also fair to the person or people constructing this? There has to be somewhere there where we can make money and be returned an asset that's still usable, doesn't there?
You know, Ben, Commissioner, I think I've been getting the same emails that you've been getting. And one of the thoughts was there was at least an allegation that there's lots of places across the United States that use ground leases for this type of an operation. And maybe what we ought to do is seek out from a whole host of these airports and try and get their pro forma ground lease to see how they're doing it. And then we have a little work session. Well, what would be acceptable to us? What would we like to see in a ground lease? And see if we can't create something that's a win-win for everybody. There's a lot of demand in the local area. They're more than willing to come in and put up a T-hanger at their expense. And they're willing to pay us a ground lease. But I think we got to be careful how we do it, but I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, and I would clarify the emails that I'm getting and the interest I'm getting. I haven't heard from anyone that is not a local and that doesn't live here full time. It's all locals. So if that matters, but the interest is definitely local. So
if I may, we're jumping just a little bit ahead because I do have a separate paper on ground leasing subject, and without not giving enough time to some of the other issues, happy to jump into some of those conversation points. But any of the other key issues in this paper specifically that we might discuss, again, I just don't want to skip them over, but I'd love to jump into the ground lease subject if that's where you guys would like to go. But you might find I've produced another paper specifically on ground leasing. This is born out of some of the conversations that we've had previously. Commissioner Strike had asked for a proper financial analysis of port capitalized hangars. And is it worthwhile? I think that is a justifiable request. Why wouldn't we look at if we can do it ourselves first? And essentially, the pro forma, there was a financial model that was presented back in March, which showed that it wouldn't pencil out. It didn't get cash on cash till year 16. And since I didn't produce that financial model, I felt like it was worthwhile for me to run my own. And I found those same results. That pro forma is on the next page if you guys should want to review it. But essentially, to get into the meat and potatoes of what are the next steps? Staff would suggest drafting a lease template. Some of these key items, revisionary clauses that essentially after 25, 30 years, the structure becomes port property. Maintenance clauses or covenants that require regular maintenance. There's ways to maintain control or management authority over these structures over the life of the lease. That's maybe they weren't included in the past, but this is not a new concept. It can be navigated, but this was part of the process to at least vet whether we could do it ourselves. And be happy to share this Excel spreadsheet with anybody who'd like to dig into some of the numbers and presumptions. But it largely, it wouldn't behoove the port to try to build our own T hangars or box hangars. And to echo what Commissioner Fox and Commissioner Shepard have said, I too, or staff in general, receives quite a few interested parties who are looking to develop. So this is part of the process, and I think this is more just to fulfill the request to vet whether the port should look at doing it ourselves or not, and what would be the next steps. I think it's worthwhile for some of those key items to be capitulated in a lease template and that reviewed, see if that gives the comfort level that would be necessary to move forward with a ground lease. With no commitment, this is still a part of the process to see whether it's viable or not.
And then aspirationally, maybe a goal could be, how do we find a way that in the next period of time, 4 years, 6 years, that we build, how many are on the waiting list right now?
I think it's shorter, or Daryl, you could speak to that real quickly.
34.
74.
34.
34.
34.
Okay. So let's say in the next 4 years, we build 40 T hangars. 40. Could we get some economies of scale as we do this lease build type of an operation? Maybe we consider somebody that'll come in and build 10 of them at a time, and we allow them to sublease, but we still get a piece of it. And then after a certain period of time, it reverts to us. Lots of different ways to do it. But sometimes if you look at things in economies of scale, it may make things work for you.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't think we've gone down the pathway of what that actual lease agreement might look like. Would it be for an individual hangar space or a block of? And I think it's worthwhile to review all of those options. And it doesn't seem like through the conversations that I've had that some of those interested parties are reluctant to develop in mass. So it's certainly a conversation that I think it's worthwhile to have.
Gregor, I'm just curious, as far as when you talk about the private sector building hangars, what about the infrastructure? Who's going to cover that cost as far as paving to the hangar, sewer? Do the hangars have restrooms in them, power source? Who's going to provide that infrastructure at whose cost?
Well, presumably about the scope of the development, it would be a cost that would be incurred by said developer. I don't think there's any restrooms in any T hangars currently. That's evidenced by the porta potties that are out there. But you'll see, as far as our FAA AIP grant requests, some of the approach of apron that can be included in federal, like that can be partially financed by federal funding. So it hasn't been fully vetted in the sense of who's going to incur all the costs, but I think the port would be smart to push that on said developer as much as possible.
I also think that as far as, you talk about these individuals have contacted us saying that these ground leases are happening around the country. I mean, I think that they're interested enough that they would be more than happy to probably seek out some of this information for us and provide it to us to just help, help get the as much information as possible. I think that building, economy of scale, if we knew that we had 10 people that wanted 10 hangars, and we could go forward and build those and then utilize profits from that to build the next 10. I mean, it seems like at this day and age, with the way that the economy is, it seems like this is one of the most viable ways to be win-win with making a lot of people happy and getting us some additional rent income.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think with the amount of messages we're getting from constituents and the AAC about really pushing to move forward with the T-hanger lease program, I think looking to staff to draft a lease agreement is pretty high priority.
So the other thing that I would like to see longer term is the infrastructure buildings there. The FBO is terrible. It is really worn out. I'd love to see a really nice facility. It doesn't have to be 5-star, but at least a 3-star facility that people would like to go use. And again, is there a way that we could have a master developer and get really creative, partly development funded, partly FBO funded, partly us funded, partly grants, but think up a little bigger.
You bring up an interesting point. I believe there are businesses in town that would be very interested in relocating to the airport and constructing something quite nice. Businesses that perhaps are located in not the most advantageous place for what they do. It would be much more appropriate to have at the airport. Part of another development idea there, getting people out there constructing new offices, new buildings, new test facilities could all be part of that same idea. It's not just T-hangers. There are other companies that would love to build something out there that specifically need to be around an airport.
And that goes back to the aesthetic that you talk about, Greg. I think that there's a lot of room for improvement to, have the visitor experience better, have the local experience better, and just have there be a more inviting way. I see people crossing the street at Tucker Road all the time to go walk around, and I could see it being an attraction that people want to come to and come here and stay and all of that. So it could be good for everyone all around. So I'm all for that too. I like the idea of a master developer checking it out.
It's all great stuff. Is there anything else before I give it back to you, President Shepard?
Not from me. Any other commissioners with questions or need to add anything to what we'd like to see moving forward?
I think we gave Greg a big bite right there.
I do too. A lot of information we're going to need before we start making these decisions, but definitely.
Well, the community's been chewing on me already, so it's going to take a big bite.
Right. And I mean, I think we're on the same page. This needs to be, airport needs to be positive. This needs to be a good deal for the citizens of Hood River at the front and back end of if call it a lease, call it a development agreement, whatever. If it is, fine.
Agreed. Yeah, there's no commitment in doing this effort and coming up with a way to review it.
Hey, one last item there. When you're thinking about this whole program, I just wonder if it's not worth having a community either survey or a community meeting to talk about what would the community like to really see out at the airport. And that includes the local businesses. So we've got a vision, but how does it really fit in with everybody else?
Good point.
All right. Excellent.
Thank you all.
Who knows what ordinance 24 is?
All right, commissioners.
Got it, Daryl.
Hi, everybody. So this memo really is mostly informational for you. If you have questions about it, we wanted to just give you guys an overview of some of the underlying things that we're working on that sound super simple, like, why don't we fix this? Well, it's not as easy as one might think. So staff has worked with legal, and specifically Anna has invested a great amount of time into some of these topics, and trying to figure out a way that we can be in front of some of the issues and things we might be able to solve. So I would love for you guys to drive the conversation with any questions, and I think Anna will be available also to answer some of the more technical parts of what can we do to fix this, what can we do to be better, what do we see down the road. So I'm going to just turn it back to you guys.
I'll jump in. I read through all of your items here, and I don't see why we're just, let's go do it. Let's get our books in order where we can take action that we need to take action on. So if we need to change some paper, let's change some paper.
Daryl, I have one question. I know that it's port property, but we're also within the city limits. So I don't understand why the city has such hesitation of patrolling. And I mean,
they do patrol, but as far as enforcement goes, a lot of it comes down to are we talking about the trespassing issue? And
well, just any issues, like why can't we call the police for animal control or overnight camping? Or
so we could call animal control, but our ordinance, and that's the county of Hood River, their ordinances don't line up. So the way it stands, the animal control cannot issue any kind of citation at the moment to someone on port property. She can give them a verbal warning, but to actually write the citation, we don't have that lined up. So Anna and I have spoken about this at some length, and it just is going to require the commissioners saying, I want port staff and I would like legal to spend a lot of time, not a lot, but a fair amount of time, and how you want to spend your money. So all of this is solvable with staff time and port money. But that's one of those things we need to true up. Now, I think this one can be pretty quickly trued up. Would you agree, Anna?
yes.
Yeah, so it's just something we'd have to say is, would the commission like for us to move forward and get her fixed?
Yeah, I'm more concerned about the increase in homelessness that we're seeing around town and overnight camping. And so is this something that is this something that is just a port thing, or is this something that we need to be talking with the city and the county so that we all have the same, we're all in line with each other?
So this will definitely, we need collaboration with the city as far as any kind of enforcement. So that I have to turn over to Anna because it really kind of comes down to the trespassing part of it, where our ordinance, we've looked at our ordinance through the SDO, which we mentioned on number 5 here of, okay, are we being discriminatory in anything that we're doing? Because that's what we have to make sure. We're not singling out the homeless versus anyone else utilizing port property. And Anna and Jerry took a pretty good look at that and feel like our current ordinance is pretty solid. But what we need to do is be able to, how do we move people along? How do we keep them from setting up homeless camps and not violate anyone's civil rights? Is that the right language you would use, Anna, with that?
Pretty much. I mean, it's public property. The trespass issue can be kind of tricky in that, our port ordinance is very clear that says there shall be no camping, overnight camping on port property, period. And so that doesn't discriminate against anyone. That applies to everyone. The issue is, when port personnel encounter somebody who's camping, they can tell them it is against port ordinance and ask them to move along. One of the things that we talked a little bit about was these are in areas, seem to be happening increasingly in areas that don't currently have signage. So another remedy for this is going to be for the port to, invest some money into proper signage, and that is like more in the Marina Green area, the gravel lot outside of the DMV, out by the boat ramp, marina parking lot, those areas. The pay to park zone areas, which are closer to like Nichols Basin and along Portway Ave, those have the signage that says no camping, and there's the pay to park zone, so people understand that you're supposed to pay to park there, and it's patrolled. And typically someone's, if somebody is there after camping hour or after the overnight hours are, which are in the ordinance, I think is at 9 p.m. or maybe 11 p.m. That, they will have to move along. But those signs aren't posted currently in the area closer to Marina Green. So another suggested or idea for fixing is just investing in more signage. That the other issue kind of is that there is language in the existing ordinance 24 for enforcement, but as far as authority for, there's parking complaints in pay to park zones, but there's a little bit more of an involved procedure for issuing some kind of penalty or fine for the areas that aren't pay to park zones. And it may or may not be, worth the port's money to enforce, to pursue those.
Thank you. And I'm curious, I'm all for enforcement and allowing, but is having the signs probably a logical first step, be it for any kind of camping, any kind of the ridiculous selfishness of the dogs and people letting their dogs run everywhere down there right now, before we start enforcing, having all of that in place. That way you're not offering a path for a recourse for someone to say, well, I didn't know there was no camping.
That's what we've been working on, is figuring out, okay, to get to here, we have to start here. So it does start with signage. It started with our conversation with Anna, looking at our ordinance, looking at what the city has in place or doesn't have in place. And then it's like, okay, then we need signage. And then where do we go after that? So I'm in complete agreement with you with that yes, we want to have the path that makes the most sense. So and this is just another thing, it is time consuming and expensive, and will involve us working with our legal team. And so we need the head nods from the commissioners that, yes, we want you guys to work on this. And
well, that's where I'm kind of trying to get as far as direction. I understand the steps and the time and the investment it's going to take.
Yes.
Directionally, do we want to get to a point of enforcement? Like, no, this is important. Animal control, trespass, these things are important to the commission, and we want to get to that point. My answer is yes. I'd like the other commissioners to know, do we want to get to that point where we can enforce these, and I'll ask staff to do what they need to do.
So the key piece will be here is that the port isn't the enforcement mechanism. So we are not enforcement. So that's where we really have to tie in with the city and the county and all get on the same page.
Exactly what I mean.
Yep.
Commissioner Fox, I would say, yeah, there's paper we're going to have to create, but we know at some point in time, we're going to have to put signage up. Let's go buy the signs now and get them up.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the details we might want to work out is that timing. Our overnight no parking time is from 11 to 6, and the cities is from 10 to 7. So if we want to align, we want to change that timing, and that'll prompt a refresh of all those existing signs plus the installation of the new signs. We have such a compact zone that's in a lot of ways sort of a patchwork of regulation. You walk one block and you're under different rules. And so it's really something we want to try to do to unify the code all over the waterfront and align it with the cities. Simple things like that.
Really, all that will take
Would-
is, oh, sorry. What that will,
sorry, I was just gonna,
oh, go ahead, Heather.
go ahead, Anna.
What that's going to take is just some language to the existing ordinance, just amending some of that language. So, like for example, the animal control, we have 2 provisions under the existing ordinance that already address one animal control, one animal waste, but just revising that. And then there's the procedure, the statutory procedure for adopting an amended ordinance, and that's presenting it to you, the commission, having you have I think there's 2 readings involved. And then after the the commissioners approve the final version and adopt the last, I think the last reading occurs, then the effective date becomes like 30 days after or something. So there's some procedural steps to jump through too. But, like Genevieve said, it makes a lot of sense to kind of just have that alignment in place so that, when abandoned vehicles are left in certain areas on port property, it's under city code that the city has to deal with that kind of stuff. And it is, we just need to work with the city to understand what documentation do they require to been abandoned for more than 72 hours, etc., that kind of thing.
Mike, Commissioner Falk, Commissioner Strike, do we still have a patrol that goes around and checks all our gates at nights and notifies the people who are loitering to move on? We still have that service?
We do.
Okay. Is, in your professional opinion, has that been effective? Is that better than actually having a multitude of signs that look like heck on the waterfront? It's a beautiful place.
I would say that it has been quite effective. I think John would agree with me. He works closely with Kenton, who is our night enforcement. John is the main liaison with him, and Kenton really fills us in on what he sees, having a set of eyes on port property at nighttime. And I personally believe it's very beneficial. John, would you chime in? What you think?
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't agree more. This is, I really consider it life-changing since we've had him here at night. Just our awareness of what actually goes on our properties at night has become a lot. We really have a lot clearer picture of what was going on. It's known now that our parks close at a certain time. It's known that somebody's coming around to talk to you. That has really helped things.
Well, Anna, can you maybe answer this question for me? From a legal standpoint, what's more effective, to have somebody come up and personally tell the individual to leave, that they represent the Port of Hood River, this is the ordinance 24, you can't stay here? What's best for you to process in law, or the local DEA to process?
I kind of like how when we had a conversation about this, Daryl kind of used the phrase, your ordinance is your backstop. So, if you've got somebody who's trespassing and there isn't a sign there, and we've got Kenton that goes out and says, I'm sorry, but the park is closed at this time, you can't stay here overnight. And they say, why not? Well, where's that posted? Where people aren't going to the website. They're not printing down the ordinance before they come hang out at the port. So I think that, if there's a sign there and then there's a person there that says you can't stay here, there's this, you can point to the sign. I agree. You don't want to have too many things, but that helps. And then if there's an actual adopted ordinance to back that up, that, that's, I think that's the kind of, the authority that you want to point to. And that's actually where the port has their authority to make these rules and have some enforcement.
Genevieve, in the past, don't we have present signs already that stipulate camping hours and overnight parking? We already have that in place.
We have them. We have lots of signage, as you noted, but like Daryl was pointing out, and Anna, they're at the more heavily used areas. And for this particular discussion, those are in the not so heavily used areas, at least not in the evenings. And so there's fewer signs there because there historically has been not as much folks there. So these are the quieter parts of the waterfront that we need to add more signage. I hate doing it, I really do, but we do need to be able to point to a sign and say, hey, that's the rule.
How many signs are we talking about?
Oh God, at least 20 new ones, I would guess, Daryl, shooting from the hip.
The entire Marina Basin needs to be re-signed or signed. And then we need to fix a lot of our signs that are already existing because they don't read properly in order for us to enforce.
Daryl, when we go through that process, I think it would be good just so that all the entities are aligned. And seeing Anna here, I was reminded we also should check in what Parks and Rec, animal control, waste, pet waste, and all of that, because I think it would just be good if all of these agencies, we were all on the same page of things. It'd be so much easier. You can be here from 10 to 7, but here from 11 to 6, or can't be here. So I like the fact of getting us all on the same page as all of these other main entities of our community.
Yes, and I have met with the sheriff and with animal control, and said, how can we all be on the same page? What can we do? And they said, well, the first thing you need to do is get your ordinance lined up with us, and that's where we've got to start, and then go from there. And the same will be with the city, and we need to set a meeting with Chief Holtze and figure out, okay, how do we want to move forward so that we're all on the same page with consistency. And so this is a task that will require Anna's expertise of looking at what the city has for the rules, what the county has for the rules, and then looking at our ordinance with the port, and then make sure that we can all kind of be the same. And that's truly what we would like to work towards.
So question for you, Daryl. Can we take an approach that our ordinance basically points right at, let's say, Hood River ordinance, so we don't have to keep changing it every time they change it? Can we do it that simply?
Definitely. I believe, Anna, that's something that we've worked on. We feel like Ordinance 24 is really solid. There's just a few tiny little tweaks that we need to do to it to make it right. But that is what we really want to do, is keep it as simple as possible and point to what they have, and without, I don't know how to say that in the right way, but basically, yes, just streamline the whole thing and be like, what the city's got going is what we're going to have going.
Certainly for the animal control piece, that's exactly what the language in, I think it's Title 6 of the Hood River County Zoning Code just says, that they will enforce their animal zoning for any jurisdiction within the county that adopts their ordinance, so or their Title 6. So that's all we have to do is refer to their Title 6 for the county, and the county is the authority for animal control enforcement and in this within Hood River. So and then for the city stuff, I think that as Genevieve brought up, having it aligned the same makes a lot of sense as far as hours. And then I think the port also has, I think since 2014, an intergovernmental agreement for the city police to come and enforce some issues if it's if it's port specific issues. But when there are other issues that occur on port property that require police involvement, then the police comes anyway. I mean, if there are altercations, if there are thefts, if there are other things that of individuals breaking the law on port property, the city police gets involved anyway. We don't have, the port doesn't have its own police authority. So I think that that's probably the easiest way to go, is just, aligning as closely as possible with city and county rules. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes
Mr.
sense.
Fox?
Is that a direction? Is that the direction we want to go? Yes. Yes. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. We're gonna get done with this earlier than we thought. Communications plan.
Unmute myself. So I'll just be brief in the intro and hopefully get right to the discussion. Assuming that you read the report, the last time the commission updated the communications plan was in 2018. And of course, the organization has gone through some pretty substantial experiences since 2018. As a public agency, our communication plan is a little bit different than what you might be used to in a campaign-based plan that has really a specific set of metrics, a specific target goal. What this does is really try to impose some guiding principles over how the port speaks to its constituency. There's some basic assumptions that we have some legal requirements in terms of public notice and public involvement and some decisions, transparency, and of course, public access to our records and proper archiving of those records. But there's a second layer there that's really the human communication part of it. This draft plan, that's really a discussion draft, is presented with the considerations from really three main sources. One is our strategic business plan that's been adopted, the strategic work plan, and anticipating the Rbmc PR side of things for the bridge replacement project, and just the ongoing business of the port, anticipating all of those changes to the way that so many of our services and facilities will operate, the rules and regs for marina and the airport, and really just the impact of our major focus, bridge replacement, that ripple effect in all the other arenas of the port. One big change in the update to our strategic plan is that the commission added diversity to its list of core values. And that's going to ripple through our communication plan as well, especially throughout the pandemic. But even regardless, I think one of our biggest successes in the past 3 years has been Fred's hiring of multiple bilingual staff at the front end customer service side of our operations. We didn't have that when I got here in 2015, and we now have multiple staff available who are fluent Spanish speakers, and that alone has 1,000% improved our communications. I'm one of those people who's a kind of a Marshall McLuhan follower. I believe the medium is the message, and it goes beyond the language that this information is delivered. If the medium is something that you're not used to using, then the message is that this information is not for you. And so what we want to do is strive to make sure that we're reaching all of our constituent audiences, especially the ones required by law to reach for our major bridge replacement project, in the ways that they're used to receiving information, and that'll be the most efficient and effective. I have really big concerns about waterfront safety and the messaging along the waterfront, especially following on the 2 tragic drownings on the waterfront. We want to make sure we do a better job of relaying the natural hazards that exist out there in multiple languages, and really in the media that will really get to our users and make sure everybody understands that natural hazards exist on the waterfront. So with that little summary, I'm happy to answer any questions about the activity that's reported in the report from the last 3 years, and really just want to hear from you on some feedback on that draft plan.
Well, more of a question. Obviously, very good work. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more needed in this part of what we do over the course of the next few years. With everything that's going on, it's just going to be more and more and more.
Yeah.
Do you have the staff that you need to cover it?
Today, no. But as fall planning is part of the beginning of our budget planning process, you will be seeing proposals from staff on how to meet the needs of a lot of these programs.
I knew the answer to that question. I just wanted you to answer it.
Yeah.
But good, thank you.
Genevieve, I know that you work tirelessly about our Facebook and our webpage and the listserv and getting the message out. I just am looking, you know, if I'm a visitor from somewhere and I'm going to come to Hood River, I would never think to look at the Port of Hood River website
Right.
to get any information. So I really just want to think that this is a great year now that Visit Hood River and Travel Oregon are trying to do similar messaging of things of, you know, how to gorge wisely, or I don't know the slogan, but
they have
really
Ready, Set, Gorge.
Ready, Set, Gorge, thank you.
Yeah.
And just making sure that they have all of the information from you to get the word out. Because I think that's the biggest thing we all get complaints about is I didn't know. There was an E. coli thing I didn't know. Well, we didn't know, you know, and so it's you can never do enough. And so I just strongly encourage partnering with these other entities to help get the messages out because they have a lot more money than we do. And they're happy.
And they have a much bigger audience than we do as well.
And they have a much bigger audience.
Yeah. And that's a two-way street too, Christy, because Travel Oregon knows that they need the partnership of the agencies on the ground to do the exact same thing, make sure that they get the message to the end user in the best way. You know, they gave us a grant for just this exact issue. So yeah, I can't agree with you more. Partnership is key.
And I read through this draft plan and nothing really jumped out at me. The only thing I would put a little bit of caution on is that I would say over the last couple of years, there's been a change in divisiveness, I guess would be a word that I would use, centered around a specific word of equity. So I like in our values, you use the word diversity, and I like the word, you know, inclusiveness. And I just know that right now, especially like in school boards, I'm hearing it an awful lot that this word equity is starting to have almost a negative connotation to it of disclusion of certain populations instead of trying to be inclusive of all populations. And so you being a wordsmith that you are, maybe we could just be a little bit cognizant of that specific word and using something more of an inclusiveness or a diversiveness word that doesn't have a negative tone. And I would say that it's only gotten that negative tone in the last maybe 2 years. But other than that, I thought it was fantastic.
Well, you know, on the topic of the last 2 years, you know, one of the things I think that really has hurt us, and I've written about that in this plan, is that we haven't been able to do our face-to-face work. Hopefully we'll be getting back to that. And we really want to, every time we talk about the plan, we talk about the importance of our commissioners being the face of the port, being the voice of the port, reaching out to your constituency, listening to them and informing them. So part of what we want to, when we do get down to the level of a task list and a timeline and a work plan, we really do want to start talking about developing white papers on certain topics, developing talking sheets for you to take to speaking engagements as representatives of the port, developing slide presentation templates, you know, social media templates and things like that to assist you to do your job better, to make sure that you are able to really be the voice of the port and really fulfill that role that you've been elected to do. A lot of that is so much preparation. one of the things that I really miss about not being able to meet in person and not being quite as mobile as we used to be is my access to you and my ability to help coach you through media relations and, public speaking on the record and all of those implications of how we want to, be disciplined in how we talk and how we, especially to the media. And that is going to be a much greater concern as we go forward. And the port is such an important partner in the bridge replacement project that will really have national and international eyes on the public record and the decision-making process. That the way that we speak about the project is really critical to the project's success. And so that's one of the things that I want to work out is a toolkit for that. And that's something that really the Rbmc will be leading because it's specific about bridge replacement, but it's a high priority even from today until they're up to speed and in their offices. So it's maintaining our project credibility. As you know, I was involved in the formation of the One Gorge Advocacy Group in 2015. That was a direct response to a bad reputation in the state legislatures that nobody in the gorge could work together. And this was a really bad that we were constantly arguing, and we'd be advocating for one thing in the legislature, and then the same day somebody would call and argue against that. And how do we unify and how do we coordinate our advocacy so we can get things done? And so that's a really big need. And it's really something that requires some face-to-face time and talking together, not just in a meeting, but just over sandwiches and over coffee. And so that's something that is really part of our usual MO that we've lost. And so I hope we get back to that.
Any other comments on this? Thank you so much for all that work.
I just had one little comment about the signage. Genevieve, you mentioned putting signage in multiple languages. And I was just thinking some sort of universal pictogram sign works really well for multiple languages without having to use translations.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we did do that. We had some sort of steep drop off, drowning danger, out on the sandbar. As Christy said, especially with international visitors, they're not checking the park's website before they go swimming at a beach. They're getting to the beach and looking around and seeing what everybody else is doing. The problem is that here, the locals know where all the hazards are. So they're out there, narrowly missing them. And somebody who doesn't know that there's an undertow in a certain spot. The problem with signage is that it's semi-permanent and our environment is a dynamic and changing sediment deposit. And we really do rely on the local partnerships to let us know, that the sandbar has changed shape. And that heavy undertow is 50 feet away from where it was before. And so it's really, really challenging thing to sign. But we'll do our best.
I'm sure you'll do great.
Okay.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our fall planning meeting, at least to the end of the agenda. Are there any other comments? We're gonna, I guess Anna can answer this for me. Do I need to officially adjourn this meeting and open regular session? Would that be proper? Yes. Okay.
I believe so. And Genevieve, do you need to do anything for changing over to regular session?
No, because we have no executive session in between. So you just have to officially adjourn the work session and then officially call to order the regular session. And so it's all can be in the same live stream.
Okay, then I shall do so. With that, we will adjourn special meeting and call to order a regular meeting of the Port Hood River Commission. I've received no modifications from commission? Is there any modifications from staff?
President Shepherd, none from staff.
Then we can move along to the consent agenda. I would just need a motion and a second to pass the consent agenda.
I've got one quick question on item number B.
Yes.
And John, real quick, remind me what we're doing on the actual work on the hook.
Yeah, Commissioner Fox, we received a grant that we are also contributing to look at building 2 new rigging areas at the hook. When the bids came in, they were a bit high, so we kind of pointed towards completing one. Grant agencies really prefer that you have a completed project versus something that needs to be picked up again later.
No problem. That's not the issue. Define rigging project. What is that?
It's a fake grass rigging area where people can put down their gear and put it together to get out onto the water.
Okay, that's all I needed to know.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
What's this get it done by date?
March
Our get done date is March 30th.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks. Anybody want to make a motion?
I can. I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Fox, agree. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please.
Chapman, aye.
Okay.
Fox, aye.
Gary and I.
And Shepherd is aye. The consent agenda will pass. Before I adjourn, I just want to say thank you to everyone on staff for all your hard work. This was exceptionally well prepared. The whole day. Thank you all so much. With that, we're adjourned. Everybody go have a great night.